Hello everyone and welcome back to Shadow Man's Stories. I can picture some of you already in bed, maybe some of you just getting home from work. Wherever you are, whatever time it is, I'm glad you're here. If this helps you relax or sleep, please like and subscribe. It means a lot. Now, let's get you comfortable, and I'll tell you tonight's story. My name is Jerry Caldwell, and I've been a ranger in these West Virginia mountains for 17 years. I've pulled 47 people out of caves, and I never lost a single one. Until November of 1987. People around here know me. My family's been in these mountains since 1847. My great-great-grandfather was one of the first to settle on Devil's Backbone Ridge. My own grandfather guided folks through these trails before there were any official rangers at all. When my wife Sarah died 3 years back in that car accident, folks said I should quit and move to the city with my twin girls. But these mountains are in my blood. This is where I belong. I work out of the ranger station 12 miles from the nearest town, if you can call Hollow Creek a town with its 847 people. My specialty is cave rescue. I've been crawling through these limestone caves for 23 years, since I was 20. I know every tunnel, every drop, every squeeze in 3 counties. At least, I thought I did. Devil's Backbone Ridge sits 200 feet above sea level. It's a narrow strip of rock with 500-foot drops on both sides. The Cherokee used to call it neutral ground. No tribe would claim it. They had stories about this place. Old stories about empty ones who lived in the deepest caves. Stories about people who went into the darkness and came out hollow. I always figured those were just tales to keep kids from wandering into dangerous caves. I'm a practical man. Everything has an explanation. Strange sounds in caves, air currents and echo patterns, weird temperature changes, underground water and limestone formations. People getting lost? Poor planning and panic. That's what I believed anyway. November started warm that year, then turned cold fast. The kind of weather that makes thick fog settle in the valleys and play tricks with your eyes. On November 15th, I got the call that changed everything. 3 college kids from Marshall University had gone into Devil's Throat cave system 2 days earlier. Devil's Throat is the biggest cave network on the ridge, miles of tunnels, some mapped, some not. The kids were experienced cavers, or so they claimed. They had permits, proper gear, told folks at the campground they'd be back by nightfall. That was 48 hours ago. I found their car still parked at the trailhead. Their backpacks were sitting right at the cave entrance, food untouched. Emergency whistle, unused. That bothered me. Experienced cavers don't abandon their supplies at the entrance. They take everything with them. But people do stupid things when they panic. I called in Deputy Marcus Hayes. He's been caving with me for 10 years. And Lisa Park, a ranger from the next county over who knows technical climbing. We gave it the full 72 hours before declaring them presumed dead, but I wanted to mount a rescue effort immediately. The morning we went in, something felt wrong. I couldn't put my finger on it at first. The air was too still. No bird sounds, even though November usually has plenty of crows and hawks hunting before winter sets in. Even the insects seemed quiet. Old Charlie Mullins met us at the cave entrance. Charlie's 78 and knows these mountains better than anyone alive. His family came here even before mine. He took one look at Devil's Throat and shook his head. "Been feeling wrong up here for days," he said. "Animals won't come near this place. Haven't seen so much as a squirrel." I figured the weather had them spooked. Animals can sense barometric pressure changes before storms. But when we checked our instruments before going in, the readings were strange. The temperature was 15 degrees colder than it should have been. The barometric pressure showed numbers that didn't make sense, like we were 1,000 feet higher than we actually were. Equipment malfunction, I told myself. Cold weather can mess with electronics. We roped up and entered Devil's Throat at 9 a.m. sharp. I've been in this cave system hundreds of times. I know it like my own house. But 10 feet inside, I noticed something that made my skin crawl. The echoes were wrong. When you call out in a cave, you know exactly how the sound should bounce back. Every cave has its own voice, but our voices seemed to get swallowed up by the rock itself. When Marcus shouted to test his radio, the sound just died in the air. "Weird acoustics today," Lisa said. but I could hear uncertainty in her voice. We pushed deeper. At the first major junction, I found the first thing that really worried me. Footprints in the muddy cave floor, clear as day. 3 sets, just like we expected. But they started normal at the entrance and got longer as they went deeper into the cave. Not longer strides, longer feet, as if the people making them were stretching somehow. "Must be the mud settling," Marcus said when I pointed it out. "But I've tracked people through cave mud for years. Mud doesn't work that way." 200 feet down, we found the helmet. It belonged to one of the college kids, had his name written inside in black marker, but it was sitting in a passage I'd never seen before, and I've mapped every inch of this system. The helmet was covered in a thin layer of frost, even though it was 45 degrees outside. That's when I started to get really scared. We'd been in the cave for 2 hours when the real strangeness started. Our headlamps, which should have been good for 8 hours on fresh batteries, began dimming. The beams seemed shorter, like the darkness was pushing back against the light. "Check your batteries," I told the team. Everyone's were fine, fully charged before we came in, but the light kept getting weaker. Marcus was testing his radio every 15 minutes, standard protocol. The static got worse the deeper we went. By the time we reached what should have been the 300-foot mark, voices coming through the radio were distorted and stretched out like someone was playing a recording at the wrong speed. "Base, this is rescue team." The voice from our surface coordinator sounded like it was coming from underwater. "Please, respond." "This is Caldwell," I said into my radio. "We're at the first main chamber, proceeding toward the back tunnels." Nothing but static answered us. Lisa was checking her compass every few minutes. Cave systems can mess with magnetic readings due to mineral deposits, but I'd never seen a compass needle spin like a wheel before. "Iron ore," I said, trying to convince myself. "Heavy iron deposits." But I knew these caves. There was no iron ore in Devil's Throat. We found the second helmet at the entrance to what the old maps called the deep section. This one belonged to Sarah Chen, according to the name inside. But just like the first helmet, it was sitting in a place that shouldn't exist. A side passage that wasn't on any survey I'd ever seen. "How is this possible?" Lisa asked, shining her dimming light down the unmapped tunnel. "You said you knew every inch of this system." I did. Or thought I did. Charlie Mullins had been quiet for the last hour, just following behind us with his old kerosene lantern. The flame kept flickering even though there was no air current. "Charlie," I said, "you ever been down this passage before?" He stopped walking. In the weak light, his weathered face looked gray as limestone. "My grandfather told me about passages that ain't always there," he said quietly. "Said some parts of these caves only open up when the hollow men are hunting. Charlie, that's just folklore." "Is it?" He pointed down the unmapped tunnel. "Then explain that passage. Explain why our lights are dying. Explain why it's cold enough to frost a helmet in November." I couldn't. We had to make a choice. Follow the unmapped pass, sage where we'd found the helmet, or stick to the known routes. The missing students had obviously gone down the unknown tunnel. That's where their gear was leading us. We follow the evidence, I decided. Stay close. Stay roped together. The unmapped passage sloped downward at a sharp angle. The walls were wrong somehow, too smooth, like they'd been carved by tools instead of water. Our footsteps echoed strangely, creating sounds that seemed to come from behind us, even when we were walking forward. "Jerry," Marcus said, and I could hear the fear in his voice. "Look at this." He was shining his light on the cave wall. Carved into the limestone, about shoulder height, were initials and a date. J.C. 1983, my initials. Jerry Caldwell. But I'd never been in this passage before, and in 1983, I was stationed in another county, working the state parks near Charleston. "Somebody's playing games with us," I said, but my voice came out shaky. Charlie looked at the carving and went completely silent. He wouldn't say another word. 300 feet down the impossible passage, we started hearing whispers. At first I thought it was air moving through cracks in the rock, Caves make all kinds of sounds. But as we got deeper, the whispers became clearer. They sounded like conversations happening just around the next corner, but when we'd reach that corner, nothing would be there. Lisa grabbed my arm. "Did you hear that?" I had. Someone had whispered her name. "Sound carries weird in caves," I said, but I didn't believe it myself. Our lights were getting so dim we could barely see 10 feet ahead. The temperature had dropped to the point where our breath was visible, even though we were hundreds of feet underground where it should be a constant 55 degrees. Then Marcus screamed. He was bringing up the rear of our group when something brushed against his neck. When we turned around, he was swatting at empty air, but the look of terror on his face was real. "Something touched me," he gasped. "Something cold, like fingers, but wrong." We huddled together. 4 people with dying lights in a passage that shouldn't exist, and I realized we were in serious trouble. Not just lost in a cave trouble, something else entirely. That's when we found the third helmet, and with it, the first body. The helmet belonged to Mike Torres, the third missing student. It was sitting next to what looked like Mike himself, propped up against the cave wall. But when Lisa shined her light directly on him, we could see something was terribly wrong. He was breathing, but barely. His skin was white as cave limestone. His eyes were open, but they didn't track our lights or respond to his name. When I checked his pulse, his skin was ice cold, but he was still alive. "Mike." I shook his shoulders gently. "Mike, can you hear me?" His head lolled toward me and he opened his mouth. When he spoke, his voice was barely a whisper, and what he said made my blood freeze. "So cold. Getting empty. They're coming." That's when the real whispers started. Not from cracks in the rock or air currents. From deeper in the cave where our lights couldn't reach, and they were getting closer. We had to move. Mike Torres was hypothermic and barely conscious, but we couldn't leave him. Marcus and I rigged up a carrying harness while Lisa kept watch on our back trail. Charlie just stood there, staring deeper into the cave system with his dying lantern. "They're coming," he said quietly. "I can feel them." "Who's coming?" I demanded. "Charlie, if you know something." "The hollow men," he whispered. "The empty ones. My grandfather saw them once, back in 1923. Said they used to be people who went too deep, stayed too long. The caves took their souls, left them hollow. Now they want others to join them." I wanted to tell him that was impossible, but Mike Torres was evidence that something was very wrong in Devil's Throat Cave. His body temperature was so low, he should have been dead, but he was still breathing. His pulse was slow, but steady, and his whispered warnings about something coming made my skin crawl. We started back toward the main passage, half carrying Mike between us. But when we reached what should have been the junction where we'd entered, the passage continued straight instead of turning. The way we'd come in was gone. "That's impossible," Lisa said, playing her dimming light across smooth cave walls. "We came from that direction. I marked it." She was right. She'd left a chalk arrow pointing back toward the entrance, but now there was solid rock where the junction should have been. "Caves don't change," Marcus said, but his voice was shaking. "They don't. But somehow, this one had." Charlie held up his kerosene lantern. In the flickering flame light, I could see fear on his weathered face. "They're hurting us," he said, "driving us deeper. That's what they do." The whispers were getting louder now. Not just random sounds, but what sounded like actual conversations. I could almost make out words, though I didn't want to understand what they were saying. Mike Torres stirred in our makeshift harness. His eyes opened and focused on me with more awareness than he'd shown since we found him. "Jerry," he whispered, and hearing him say my name made my heart race. "The other two, Sarah and Kevin, they're deeper down, in the chamber with all the empty places. They're still alive, but not for long." "What chamber?" I asked. "Mike, what did you see down there?" His eyes rolled back. "So many empty places. People from different times. All waiting. All hollow. They want us to stay. Want us to become empty too." He went limp again. but he was still breathing. We had no choice but to continue forward. The passage sloped down at an angle that made walking difficult. Our lights were so dim now we might as well have been using matches. Charlie's lantern was the only reliable illumination we had left. That's when we started seeing them. At first, just glimpses in the edge of the lantern light. Tall, thin shapes moving through side passages we couldn't access. They didn't walk so much as glide, making no sound on the rocky cave floor. "Did you see that?" Lisa whispered. I had. We all had. The shapes were roughly human, but wrong. Too tall, maybe 8 feet. Too thin, like they'd been stretched. And they seemed to be keeping pace with us, staying just at the edge of our vision. Marcus was checking his watch compulsively. "How long have we been down here?" I looked at mine. It showed 2:30 p.m., but Lisa's watch said 11:45 a.m. Charlie's old pocket watch showed 6:18, though he couldn't remember if that was morning or evening. Time didn't work right down here. The passage opened into a vast chamber I'd never seen before, despite decades of exploring these caves. Our lights were too weak to reach the ceiling or the far walls, but Charlie's lantern showed enough to make us all freeze in horror. The walls were covered in alcoves, dozens of them carved into the rock like shelves. And in many of the alcoves were people, not skeletons. People. Sitting upright, perfectly preserved, but wrong somehow. Their skin was white as limestone, their eyes were hollow sockets, and they were all facing deeper into the cave system, like they were watching something in the darkness. "Jesus Christ," Marcus breathed. Some of the bodies looked recent. Others were wearing clothes from different decades. I saw a woman in a 1950s dress, a man in what looked like 1930s work clothes. Further back, someone in clothes that might have been from the 1800s, but they weren't decomposed. They looked like they'd been sitting there for just a few days. "The empty places," Charlie whispered. This is what Mike meant. In the center of the chamber, we found Sarah Chen and Kevin Wu, the other 2 missing students. They were conscious, barely, sitting on the cave floor and staring deeper into the darkness. Their skin had the same white limestone color as Mike's. When I shook Sarah's shoulder, she turned toward me with the same hollow look Mike had shown. "So cold," she whispered. "Getting empty. They're coming for us. They want us to join the waiting." That's when I heard it clearly for the first time. Not whispers anymore, but voices. Human voices, coming from the preserved people in the alcoves. "Join us," they said in unison, their voices echoing from hollow chests. "Become empty. Become part of the waiting." And then, from the deepest part of the chamber, they emerged. The hollow men. 3 of them, gliding toward us across the cave floor. They were impossibly tall and thin, with skin like old leather stretched over bones. Their eye sockets were completely empty, but somehow I knew they could see us. Their mouths hung open, showing blackness inside. When they spoke, I felt their words inside my head, rather than hearing them with my ears. "Welcome," they said. "We have been waiting for you, Jerry Caldwell. Your grandfather spoke of you, said you would come to us eventually. My grandfather had died when I was 12. He'd never mentioned Devil's Throat Cave to me, but somehow these things knew him." "What do you want?" I managed to ask. "To share the emptiness," they answered. "To add you to the waiting. Your soul will make us stronger." The cold was getting worse. Not just air temperature, but a bone-deep chill that seemed to come from the hollow men themselves. Every breath I took felt like ice in my lungs. Marcus raised his radio, trying one last time to call for help. Static filled the chamber, but through it, I heard something impossible. My own voice calling back to us. "Base camp, this is Jerry Caldwell. We're all fine down here, calling off the search. The students are safe." But I hadn't said those words. I was standing right there, hearing my own voice lie to our backup team. The hollow men were closer now, close enough that their presence made the air around us freezing cold. Sarah and Kevin were getting to their feet, walking toward the empty alcoves like sleepwalkers. "Fight it," I shouted to my team. "Don't let them take you." But Lisa was already moving toward the alcoves, her face blank, her eyes starting to look hollow. We were running out of time. I grabbed Lisa's arm, trying to pull her back from the alcoves, but her skin was already cold as stone. The hollow men's influence was spreading through our team like frost across a window. "Lisa," I shook her hard. "Stay with me." She turned, and for a moment her eyes focused. "Jerry, I can hear them in my head. They're so lonely. They just want us to stay with them forever." That's when Charlie Mullins stepped forward, with his kerosene lantern held high. The flame was burning brighter than it should have, casting dancing shadows that seemed to push back against the supernatural cold. "Running water," he said firmly. "My grandfather told me. The empty ones cannot cross running water. It's the only thing that stops them. Charlie, there's no running water down here." "There is." He pointed deeper into the chamber, past the hollow men. "Hidden stream runs through the back of this cave system. Comes out 2 miles down the mountain. But we have to get past them first." The 3 hollow men spread out, trying to block our path. As they moved closer, the temperature dropped even further. My breath was coming out in white puffs, and I could see ice forming on the cave walls. Mike Torres was completely unconscious now, his body temperature so low he felt like a corpse. Sarah and Kevin were walking toward empty alcoves like they were going home after a long day. "We can't carry everyone," Marcus said through chattering teeth. "Jerry, we have to save who we can." But I wasn't leaving anyone behind. Not after 17 years, without losing a single person. I had one idea. A desperate, probably stupid idea. Cave rescue teams carry emergency flares for signal. Ling. The bright magnesium flame can be seen for miles. But down here, surrounded by supernatural darkness, maybe the light itself would be enough. I pulled the flare from my pack and struck. Zit. Brilliant white light exploded through the chamber, so bright after our dimming headlamps that everyone threw up their hands to shield their eyes. The hollow men recoiled like I'd thrown acid on them. Their hollow eye sockets seemed to smoke in the light, and they made a sound like wind through empty buildings. "The light!" Charlie shouted. "They hate the light!" I grabbed Sarah Chen's arm with my free hand. The flare light seemed to break whatever hold they had on her. Her eyes focused, and she looked around the chamber in horror. "Oh God," she whispered. "What is this place?" "We're getting out," I told her. "Can you walk?" She nodded, though she was shivering so hard she could barely stand. Marcus grabbed Kevin, who was more responsive than the others. Lisa was fighting the mental influence, shaking her head like she was trying to clear it. "The stream," Charlie said. "Follow me." We moved as fast as we could with Mike's unconscious weight between us. The flare burned bright, keeping the hollow men at a distance, but I knew it wouldn't last long. Maybe 10 minutes before we'd be back in the dark. The preserved bodies in the alcoves turned their hollow faces toward us as we passed. Some of them tried to speak, reaching out with white hands. "Don't look at them," Charlie warned. "Don't listen. They'll try to make you stay." Behind us, the hollow men were following, just outside the circle of flare light. I could hear their voices in my head, no longer speaking in unison. "Jerry," one of them whispered inside my thoughts. "Your grandfather is here, William Caldwell. He wants to see you." I almost stopped walking. My grandfather's name was William, but I forced myself to keep moving. "Don't listen," Charlie said like he could read my mind. "They know things about us. Use our memories against us." The passage Charlie led us down was narrow and steep. Water sounds, grew louder as we descended. Real water, not the whispered voices of the dead. "There," Charlie pointed ahead with his lantern. "Underground stream. Comes down from the mountain springs, flows all the way to the river." I could see it now. A stream about 10 feet wide, flowing fast over rounded rocks. The water was so clear it looked like liquid glass in the lantern light. But the hollow men were getting closer. My flare was burning down, and with it, our protection. "Once we cross," Charlie said, "we should be safe. But we all have to make it across together. If anyone gets left behind..." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. The stream was deeper than it looked, and moving fast. Marcus went first, helping to guide the others across. The water was shockingly cold, but it was regular mountain cold, not the supernatural chill of the hollow men. I was last to cross, still holding the dying flare. As I stepped into the water, the three hollow men reached the stream bank behind me. They stopped at the water's edge like they'd hit an invisible wall. "You cannot leave," they said in my head. "You belong to the empty places now. Your soul is already marked." The flare sputtered and went out, but the hollow men couldn't follow us across the water. They stood on the far bank, their hollow faces turned toward us, and let out a sound like wind through a graveyard. Charlie was right. Running water stopped them. The stream led us through passages I'd never mapped, down into the deepest parts of the mountain. It took us 2 hours of difficult travel, sometimes wading through water up to our waists, but eventually we saw natural light ahead. We emerged from a cave opening I'd never known existed, 2 miles down the mountain from Devil's Throat. It was past sunset, and the November air felt warm after the supernatural cold of the chamber. Mike Torres was hypothermic and barely conscious, but he was alive. Sarah and Kevin were shaken, but coherent. We'd all made it out. All of us except the dozens of people still sitting in those alcoves, waiting in the empty places. The official report listed it as severe hypothermia caused by unseasonable weather conditions and equipment failure. 3 college students found in unmapped cave passages, suffering from exposure, rescued by ranger team after 36-hour search operation. That was 6 months ago. Mike Torres recovered fully, physically. He transferred to a different university and won't talk about what happened in Devil's Throat. Sarah Chen changed her major from geology to art therapy. Kevin Wu moved back home to California. Marcus Hayes put in for early retirement a week after the rescue. Said he was done with caves, done with the mountains. Last I heard, he bought a house in Florida where the highest elevation is about 20 feet above sea level. Charlie Mullins never talks about what we saw down there. When I try to bring it up, he just shakes his head and changes the subject. But I notice he won't go near Devil's Backbone Ridge anymore. As for me, I requested a transfer to the Flatland Parks. Told my supervisor I wanted to work trails instead of caves. She approved it without question. Said I'd been through enough after losing my wife and deserved an easier assignment. I moved my twin daughters and myself to a little house in the valley, far from any caves. But sometimes, in the middle of the night, I wake up cold. Not regular cold, but that bone-deep chill I felt in the chamber of empty places. And I can hear whispers coming from the basement. The official story is that Devil's Throat cave system has been closed for geological survey. They put up fences and warning signs, but I know the real reason it's sealed. There are still people in those alcoves, dozens of them from different decades, all waiting in the empty places, all slowly becoming hollow. And sometimes when the wind blows just right through the mountains, I swear I can hear them calling my name. I think about my grandfather sometimes, William Caldwell, who guided people through these mountains for 40 years and died peacefully in his sleep when I was 12. I wonder if he ever encountered the hollow men. I wonder if that's why our family really stayed in these mountains for 5 generations. Not because we loved them, but because something down there wanted us to stay. The Cherokee had stories about Devil's Backbone Ridge being neutral ground. Now I understand what they really meant. It wasn't neutral because no tribe claimed it. It was neutral because it belonged to something else, something that had been waiting in those caves long before the first humans arrived in these mountains, something that's still waiting. My daughters ask me why I don't work in the caves anymore. I tell them I want to spend more time with them, which is true. But the real reason is that I'm afraid if I go underground again, I might hear my grandfather's voice calling from one of those alcoves. I might find out that the hollow men were telling the truth about him. I might discover that our family's connection to these mountains goes deeper and darker than I ever imagined. The whispers from my basement are getting louder. Last night, I found frost on my bedroom window, even though it was 60 degrees outside. I think they're coming for me. My name is Sam Blackthorne, and I've been a park ranger for 22 years. I work at Grandfather Mountain State Park in North Carolina, where the trees are older than America and the rocks tell stories that go back millions of years. My grandmother always said I had one foot in two worlds, my Cherokee blood and my job protecting tourists who come to see our sacred mountain. People call me Sam, but my Cherokee name is Nv Ganvita, which means dark protector. My grandmother gave me that name when I was 7, after my parents died in a car crash. She raised me on the reservation, taught me the old stories, the old ways. She said the mountain chose our family to be its guardians. I used to think that was just talk. Old Cherokee stories to make a scared little boy feel important. I was wrong about a lot of things. It's October 1991, and the leaves are changing colors like they do every year. Red and gold and orange, so bright it hurts your eyes. People come from all over the world to see our autumn. They drive up the winding roads, take pictures on the mile-high swinging bridge, buy T-shirts that say, "I survived Grandfather Mountain." Most of them never know they're walking on a graveyard. The Cherokee buried our chiefs and medicine men up here for hundreds of years. The high places are sacred, closer to the Creator, Grandmother used to say. The bones of my ancestors sleep in the rocks and roots, part of the mountain forever. Or they did, until white men came with shovels and science. I work in cultural resources now, which means I protect the Cherokee sites from people who want to dig them up or build gift shops on them. It's a good job, important work. My wife Maria teaches school down in the valley, and my 2 boys are away at college. Life is good, normal. That was before the storm, before the whistling started, before I learned that some stories are more than just stories. The morning it began, I was checking the mile-high bridge. October weather can be tricky up here, sunny and warm one minute, ice storm the next. The bridge is 5,946 feet above sea level, one of the highest spots in North Carolina. When the wind picks up, it sings through the cables like a giant guitar. But this morning the sound was different. Wrong. I stood at the center of the bridge, listening to something that wasn't quite wind and wasn't quite music. It reminded me of the bone whistles Grandmother used to make. Hollow bird bones carved with tiny holes that made haunting sounds when the air moved through them. Cherokee children weren't supposed to play with them after dark. Bad luck, Grandmother said. The spirits might answer. The temperature dropped 20 degrees in 10 minutes. My breath came out in white puffs, even though it had been warm enough for shirt sleeves when I started my patrol. Ice began forming on the bridge cables, making them sing a higher, thinner note that made my teeth ache. That's when I found the tourist. He was sitting on one of the benches, looking out at the valley like he was enjoying the view. Except his lips were blue, and frost covered his jacket. And when I touched his shoulder, he was hard as stone. Frozen solid in October weather that shouldn't have been cold enough to freeze water, let alone a grown man. The weird part wasn't that he was dead. People die on mountains, heart attacks, falls, exposure. The weird part was how peaceful he looked. His hands were folded in his lap, feet flat on the ground, head tilted back like he was listening to something beautiful. It was the exact position Grandmother taught me for Cherokee prayer. No way a white tourist from Ohio would know how to die like that. I called it in on my radio, but static filled the channel. Cherokee words mixed with English. Old Cherokee, the formal language used for ceremonies. I couldn't make out most of it, but I heard one phrase clear as day. Nvi duyuktav. The bones are singing. My grandmother had been dead for 3 years. There was no one on the mountain who spoke ceremonial Cherokee except me. I tried my radio again. More static, more impossible voices speaking words that made my skin crawl. I gave up and hiked back to my truck to drive to the ranger station, but the engine wouldn't start. Battery was fine, gas tank full, but something was wrong with the electrical system. All the dashboard lights blinked in a pattern I almost recognized, long and short pulses like the rhythm of Cherokee drum songs. By the time I walked the 3 miles to the station, the storm was moving in for real. Dark clouds rolled over the peaks, bringing wind that bent the ancient Fraser firs like grass. The temperature kept dropping, and that strange whistling sound grew louder. Mike Patterson, my partner, helped me coordinate with the county medical examiner. Mike's been a ranger here for 15 years. Good man. But he doesn't understand the mountain like I do. To him, it's just rock and trees and weather patterns. He's never heard the old stories, never learned to listen to what the mountain is trying to say. Probably had a heart condition, Mike said, filling out paperwork. Cold snap triggered it. Happens more than you'd think. I nodded and agreed, because that's what I was supposed to do. That's what the rational part of my brain wanted to believe. But I kept thinking about the way the dead man's hands were positioned, the Cherokee words on the radio, the sound that wasn't quite wind and wasn't quite music. That night I dreamed about my grandmother for the first time since her funeral. She was standing in her kitchen making fry bread like she used to when I was small. But her face was worried, and she kept looking toward the mountain through the window. "Navi?" she said, using my Cherokee name. "The bones are calling. Someone disturbed the sleeping places." "Grandmother, you're dead," I said in the D. Ream. "This isn't real." She turned to look at me with eyes that held centuries of sadness. "The stories are real, grandson. All of them. The bone whistlers are awake, and they're angry. Someone has to make it right." I woke up at 3 a.m. with the taste of cornbread in my mouth and the sound of whistling in my ears. The next morning brought more problems. 3 more tourists found dead, all in the same peaceful position, all frozen solid despite temperatures that never dropped below 40 degrees. The county medical examiner was baffled. No signs of violence, no obvious cause of death, but their bodies were frozen like they'd been in a meat locker for hours. Mike and I cordoned off the mile-high bridge area, but people kept coming. Peak foliage season brings thousands of visitors, and word was spreading about the mysterious deaths on Grandfather Mountain. Instead of staying away, more people showed up. Ghost hunters, paranormal investigators, reporters from the Charlotte Observer. The whistling was getting louder. I could hear it even when I was miles from the bridge, a complex melody that seemed to come from the mountain itself. Other people heard it too. Some of the tourists complained about a weird humming sound that gave them headaches. The local wildlife was acting strange, birds flying away in huge flocks, bears coming down from their winter dens and heading for lower ground. Something was driving them away. Dr. Elizabeth Running Bear arrived on the 3rd day. She's a Cherokee archaeologist who works with the Tribal Council on repatriation issues, getting stolen artifacts and remains returned to the tribe. Elizabeth is about my age, with long black hair streaked with silver and eyes that miss nothing. Her grandmother and mine were sisters, which makes us cousins by Cherokee reckoning. "Sam," she said, getting out of her pickup truck at the ranger station, "we need to talk." We walked away from Mike and the other rangers, speaking Cherokee so they wouldn't understand. "You know what's happening here," she said. It wasn't a question. "I'm beginning to," I admitted. "The bones are singing. That's what Grandmother said in my dream." Elizabeth nodded. "I've been researching the Smithsonian expedition records from 1891. They took more than 200 skulls from burial sites on this mountain, crated them up and shipped them to Washington, D.C. for scientific study. They're still there, sitting in storage rooms, never properly buried. The pieces started falling into place. Cherokee tradition says that disturbed graves create restless spirits. The bone whistlers were guardians of the dead, protectors who would hunt anyone who desecrated sacred burial grounds. I'd always thought they were just stories to scare children into respecting their ancestors. But Grandmother never lied to me. Not once. "What do they want?" I asked. "Justice," Elizabeth said. "Recognition. The return of what was stolen. And until they get it," she gestured toward the mountain, where that haunting melody continued to play. That afternoon, while Mike was dealing with reporters and medical examiners, I hiked back to the bridge area alone. The whistling was so loud now it seemed to come from inside my skull. The air itself felt different, thicker, colder, charged with something that made my hair stand on end. I found the first bone fragment near the memorial plaque for Cherokee victims of the Trail of Tears. It was old, yellow with age, carved with symbols I recognized from Grandmother's stories. A piece of skull with a hole drilled through it, the kind used to make ceremonial whistles. More bones appeared as I followed the trail. Not scattered randomly, but arranged in patterns, spirals and crosses that had meaning in Cherokee tradition. The bones were surfacing from beneath the earth, pushing up through decades of fallen leaves and soil like seeds growing in reverse. The dead were coming home. I was examining a particularly large fragment when I heard footsteps behind me, slow, deliberate steps that crunched on the frozen leaves. I turned around, expecting to see Mike or another ranger. Instead, I saw him. He was tall and thin, wearing traditional Cherokee clothes, a long shirt, leggings, moccasins. His face was painted with white clay in patterns I'd seen in old photographs, and he carried a staff topped with eagle feathers. Most importantly, he was translucent. I could see the trees through his body, but his eyes were solid black and full of pain that went deeper than death. He spoke to me in Cherokee, his voice like wind through dry leaves. "You are Novi Ganvida, grandson of Walela." My grandmother's name. No living person outside the family knew my grandmother's Cherokee name. "Yes," I whispered. "Then you know why we walk. You know why we sing." Behind him, more figures materialized from the fog that was rolling up from the valley. Dozens of Cherokee spirits in traditional dress, men and women and children, all translucent, all carrying bone whistles that glowed with pale light. The sound they made together was beautiful and terrible, a harmony that spoke of loss and rage and centuries of stolen rest. "The thieves took our bones," the lead spirit continued, "scattered our people, broke the sacred circle. We cannot rest while pieces of ourselves lie in the dark places far from home." I wanted to run. Every rational part of my brain screamed at me to get away from this impossible thing, but I was Cherokee. This was my mountain. These were my ancestors. "What do you want me to do?" I asked. "Bring them back," he said. "All of them. Every bone, every fragment. Make the thieves understand what they stole. Only then will the mountain know peace. I can't just walk into the Smithsonian and demand—" "You can," the spirit interrupted. "You must, or more will die. The mountain's anger grows stronger each day. Soon it will not matter if people are innocent or guilty. All who walk here will join our song." To prove his point, the temperature dropped another 20 degrees in seconds. Ice formed on my jacket, on my face, on the trees around us. My breath came out in white clouds that froze and fell to the ground like snow. Then they were gone, all of them, leaving only the whistling and the bitter cold and the knowledge that I was running out of time. I tried to tell Mike what I'd seen, but how do you explain ghosts to someone who believes in weather patterns and heart attacks? He listened patiently, then suggested I take a few days off. "Stress gets to everyone eventually," he said. "You've been working too hard." But there was no time for rest. More people were dying. A family from Tennessee froze to death in their car in the parking lot, even though the engine was running and the heater was on. 2 college students from Appalachian State were found on the nature trail, sitting peacefully on a bench, hands folded, faces turned toward the mountain, like they were listening to something wonderful. All of them died the same way. No violence, no struggle, just sudden freezing death in impossible circumstances. And all of them were positioned in traditional Cherokee prayer postures. The local news picked up the story. Mysterious deaths plague popular mountain resort. The state sent investigators. The CDC started asking questions about environmental toxins and unusual weather patterns. I knew they wouldn't find anything. How do you explain supernatural vengeance to scientists? Joseph Crow Dog arrived on the 5th day. He's the oldest medicine man in the Cherokee Nation, maybe 90 years old, with hands like tree roots and eyes that see things most people can't. He'd driven all the way from Oklahoma when Elizabeth called him. "This is bad, nephew," he said, using the Cherokee term for younger male relative. We were sitting in my living room, away from the crowds and investigators. The bone whistlers don't usually kill innocents. Something has made them desperate. How do we stop them? Joseph pulled out a leather pouch and showed me its contents: sage, tobacco, eagle feathers, and other sacred items I recognized from childhood ceremonies. There is a way to communicate with them safely, to negotiate, but it requires someone they trust, someone with the proper bloodline and training. He looked at me meaningfully. I don't know the old ceremonies, I protested. Grandmother taught me stories and songs, but not the sacred rituals. Your grandmother prepared you more than you know, Joseph said. The spirits chose you for a reason. You work for the white man's government, but your heart belongs to the people. You can bridge both worlds. That night, the three of us, me, Elizabeth, and Joseph, performed the bone-calling ceremony in secret, away from the park service and the media circus. We built a small fire in a clearing near the bridge, offered tobacco and cornmeal to the four directions, and sang the old songs. The spirits came immediately. This time there were hundreds of them, filling the clearing like smoke made solid. Men, women, and children from different time periods, some in ancient traditional dress, others in the clothes they wore when the soldiers came to take them west, still others in modern clothes but with old-fashioned hairstyles, all Cherokee, all dead, all carrying bone whistles that sang in harmony. The chief I'd met before stepped forward. In the firelight I could see him more clearly, the white clay paint on his face, the scars from old battles, the weariness that comes from a century of walking between worlds. You brought the keeper of the old ways, he said, nodding to Joseph. Good. Now you will understand. He gestured, and the air around us shimmered like heat waves. Suddenly we could see the mountain as it used to be, covered with Cherokee towns, gardens of corn and beans and squash, children playing in the streams, elders telling stories around evening fires. Then the vision shifted. White soldiers came with wagons and shovels. They dug up the sacred burial grounds, loading bones into crates like they were collecting firewood. Cherokee people watched from hiding places, weeping, powerless to stop the desecration. They said it was for science, the chief spirit said, to study the primitive skull shapes of savage peoples. They took our bones to prove we were less than human. The vision changed again. We saw a basement storage room in Washington, D.C., lined with metal shelves holding thousands of boxes and specimen jars, Cherokee skulls with labels like Specimen 4847, North Carolina Indian. Some had holes drilled in them for study. Others were broken apart to examine brain capacity. 100 years they have kept us in the dark, the spirit continued. 100 years we have called for justice, for proper burial, for recognition of the theft. The white government passes laws but does nothing. They keep our bones like trophies. I felt sick. I'd known about the Smithsonian collections in abstract terms, but seeing it like this, seeing the faces of the people whose remains had been stolen, made it personal. But now there is hope, the chief said, looking at me. The white government has passed a new law, the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act. It requires the return of stolen remains to the tribes. You can use this law. You can bring us home. But people are still dying, I said. Innocent people who had nothing to do with taking your bones. The spirit's expression grew sad. We do not wish to harm the innocent, but our anger grows stronger each day. Soon it will be beyond our control. The mountain itself is awakening, remembering old grievances. If we do not find peace soon, the killing will spread beyond this place. To demonstrate, he raised his bone whistle to his lips and played a single, piercing note. The temperature dropped so fast that frost formed on our clothes instantly. The fire in front of us flickered and went out, frozen solid. Then, mercifully, he lowered the whistle, and warmth returned. You have until the full moon, he said. 7 days. Bring our bones home, or we will have no choice but to protect this mountain the only way we know how, by making it too dangerous for anyone to disturb. The spirits faded away, leaving us alone with the dead fire and the weight of an impossible task. 7 days, Elizabeth said quietly, to convince the Smithsonian to release remains they've had for a century, transport them across the country, and perform proper burial ceremonies. It can't be done through normal channels, I said. The bureaucracy alone would take months. Joseph stood up slowly, his old bones creaking. Then, we don't use normal channels. We use the law and the media and the fact that people are dying. Sometimes you have to make noise to get attention. He was right. If quiet requests had worked, the bones would have been returned years ago. It was time to make some noise. The next morning, I called in sick and drove to Charlotte to meet with a civil rights lawyer Elizabeth knew. Then to the offices of the Charlotte Observer, where I told a reporter the whole story. The dead tourists, the Cherokee spirits, the stolen bones in Washington. She didn't believe the supernatural parts, of course, but she understood the legal and moral issues. Native American remains held in Smithsonian while people die on Sacred Mountain made a powerful headline. By that afternoon, the story was picked up by the Associated Press. Phone calls started coming in from Cherokee Nation headquarters in Oklahoma, from the American Indian movement, from congressmen who'd helped write NAGPRA. The pressure was building. But would it be enough? And would it happen in time? Because the whistling was getting louder, and the mountain was getting angry, the full sun. El Moon was rising when everything came together. 6 days of frantic phone calls, legal threats, media pressure, and political maneuvering had finally worked. The Smithsonian agreed to emergency repatriation of all Cherokee remains from the Grandfather Mountain area. A convoy of trucks was driving through the night from Washington, D.C., carrying 200 sets of ancestors home. But I could feel time running out. The mountain was alive with supernatural energy. The whistling had become a roar that could be heard for miles. Temperatures dropped randomly and violently. Park visitors would step from warm sunlight into pockets of air so cold their breath froze instantly. Wildlife fled in terror. Even the trees seemed to be moving, ancient roots breaking through pavement, branches reaching toward the sky like desperate hands. The Cherokee spirits were losing control. I met the convoy at the base of the mountain, along with Elizabeth, Joseph, and representatives from the Cherokee Nation. The FBI was there too, and state troopers, and more media than I'd ever seen in one place. Everyone wanted to witness this historic repatriation. What they got instead was a supernatural war. The moment the first truck crossed onto Cherokee land, the mountain exploded into activity. The temperature dropped 50 degrees in minutes. Ice formed on everything: vehicles, equipment, people. The wind picked up to hurricane force, carrying the bone-whistling sound so loud it hurt to listen to. And then we saw them. Hundreds of Cherokee spirits materialized along the road, glowing with pale light, their bone whistles raised to their lips. Men, women, and children from across the centuries, all singing together in harmony that shook the earth itself. Most of the FBI agents and reporters panicked and ran. Cars wouldn't start, radios went dead, cell phones froze solid. But I stood my ground, because this was my mountain and my people, and I had a job to do. The chief spirit I'd spoken to before appeared directly in front of the lead truck, solid enough to stop 20 tons of steel and metal. "You have brought them," he said, his voice carrying over the wind. "Our bones, our people. We can feel them calling to us." "Yes," I shouted back. "But you have to let us complete the ceremony. We need to bury them properly, with the right rituals. That's what will bring you peace." For a moment, I thought he would agree. The supernatural storm began to calm. The temperature started to rise, the whistling dropped to a manageable level. Then something went wrong. One of the remaining FBI agents, terrified and confused, drew his weapon and fired at the chief spirit. The bullets passed harmlessly through the translucent figure, but the intent was clear: violence on sacred ground, weapons drawn against Cherokee ancestors. Every spirit on the mountain screamed at once. The sound was beyond hearing, beyond enduring. It was the collective pain of a people who had suffered genocide, forced removal, cultural destruction, and now, finally, disrespect, even in death. The bone whistles played a note that resonated in human bones, in human hearts, stopping them cold. The FBI agent who'd fired collapsed instantly, frozen solid. His partner fell beside him. The media crew began dropping one by one as the supernatural cold spread like a plague. "Stop!" I yelled. But the spirits were beyond reason now. A century of pain and rage had erupted all at once, and they were killing everyone within reach. That's when I understood what I had to do. I grabbed the sacred tobacco from Joseph's bundle and walked straight into the center of the spirit gathering. The cold hit me like a physical blow, ice forming on my clothes, my skin, my lungs. But I kept walking until I stood face to face with the chief spirit. "I am Envi Gunvida," I said in Cherokee, my words visible as frozen breath. "Grandson of Walela, blood of your blood. I claim the right to speak for my people," the chief spirit. Wade's black eyes focused on me. "You would defend those who disrespect us?" "I defend justice," I said, offering the tobacco with hands that were turning blue with frostbite. "Your bones have come home. Your people remember you. The children will learn your names and your stories. Isn't that what you wanted?" Around us, the other spirits had stopped their deadly song and were listening. The mountain itself seemed to hold its breath. "The disrespect cannot stand," the chief said. "Then let me make it right." I turned to face the surviving people, the truck drivers, Joseph, Elizabeth, a handful of Cherokee Nation officials who had stayed when others fled. "Everyone put down your weapons," I commanded. "This is sacred ground. These are Cherokee ancestors returning home. Show respect." The few remaining FBI agents slowly lowered their guns. The truck drivers removed their caps. Even the reporters, who were still conscious, bowed their heads. I turned back to the chief spirit and spoke the Cherokee words my grandmother had taught me, the ones used to welcome honored guests. "Welcome home, grandfather. Your people have missed you. We have prepared a place for your rest." The rage in the spirit's eyes began to fade, replaced by something that might have been gratitude. "You speak the old words correctly," he said. "You remember the proper forms. This is good." He raised his bone whistle to his lips one final time, but now the sound was different. Not anger or pain, but a lament for the dead, a song of mourning and eventual peace. The other spirits joined in, hundreds of bone whistles playing together in harmony. The sound was heartbreakingly beautiful, a melody that spoke of loss and longing and finally, the hope of rest. As they played, the supernatural cold began to lift. The frozen FBI agents started breathing again, their hearts resuming normal rhythm. Ice melted from vehicles and equipment. The mountain itself seemed to relax, settling into stillness. When the song ended, the spirits began to fade, becoming more and more translucent until only the chief remained. "Thank you, nephew," he said to me. "You have given us what we needed: recognition, respect, and the promise of proper burial. We can rest now." "Will you really rest?" I asked. "Or will you return if the bones are disturbed again?" He smiled, the first time I'd seen any expression on his face besides pain and anger. "We will rest, but we will also watch. This mountain is protected now, by law, by tradition, and by those who understand what sacred means. The bone whistlers sleep, but we do not disappear." Then he was gone, and I was alone with the living. The reburial ceremony took place 3 days later, when the media circus had finally moved on, and only the Cherokee people remained. We buried the bones properly, with the right songs and prayers, in a location that will never be marked on any tourist map. Joseph performed the traditional rituals, Elizabeth documented everything for the tribal records, and I stood guard to make sure no one disturbed the proceedings. 200 ancestors finally got the burial they deserved. The mountain was quiet after that. No more supernatural cold, no more bone whistling, no more mysterious deaths. The mile-high bridge reopened to tourists, and life went back to normal. Mostly normal. My hair turned completely white overnight. Not gray, but pure white, like fresh snow. Maria says it makes me look distinguished, but I know what really happened. Seeing the spirits, communicating with the dead, bridging the gap between worlds. It changes a person in ways that show. I can still hear them sometimes, especially on quiet nights when the wind moves through the trees just right. Not the angry song they sang when they were trapped, but something peaceful. Cherokee lullabies, traditional prayers, the sound of people at rest. The Cherokee Nation promoted me to Special Cultural Liaison, which means I work directly with the Tribal Council on repatriation issues. It's good work, important work, and it keeps me connected to both worlds, the modern Park Service, and the ancient Cherokee traditions. My sons came, home for Christmas, and I taught them some of the old stories. Not all of them. They're not ready for the really powerful ones yet. But they learned about the bone whistlers, about the importance of respecting the dead, about the responsibilities that come with Cherokee blood. They believed me. Young people are often more open to these things than adults who think they know how the world works. Elizabeth and I stay in touch. We've helped return remains from 6 other sites where Cherokee bones were stolen by collectors and museums. Each repatriation brings peace, closure, and the quiet satisfaction of justice delayed but not denied. Joseph Crow Dog passed away last spring, but not before teaching me more of the old ceremonies. I'm not a medicine man. That's a calling that takes decades of training. But I know enough now to communicate with the spirits when necessary, to perform the proper rituals when Cherokee remains come home. The Park Service officially lists the 1991 incident as unexplained deaths attributed to unusual weather phenomena. That's fine with me. Some truths are too big for official reports. But I know what happened on Grandfather Mountain. I know that the stories grandmother told me were more than just stories. I know that some things are more important than science or bureaucracy or the comfortable belief that dead means gone forever. The Cherokee have a saying, "We are not the first people here, and we will not be the last, but we are here now." And that means something. The Bone Whistlers taught me that being here now means remembering those who came before, respecting the sacred places they left behind, and making sure their stories don't die with them. Sometimes late at night when I'm doing my rounds on the mountain, I stop at the mile-high bridge and listen to the wind sing through the cables. It sounds like music now, not the angry, hung, wry song of trapped spirits, but the peaceful harmony of ancestors at rest. But I also listen for changes in that song, because the mountain remembers everything, and the dead are never really gone. They're just waiting, watching, ready to remind us that some places are sacred, some debts must be paid, and some stories are too important to forget. My name is Sam Blackthorne. I'm a Cherokee Park Ranger, a keeper of stories, and a guardian of the places where the living world touches the spirit world. And I'm still listening. My name is Rebecca Sutton, but everyone calls me Becky. I've been a ranger at Hungry Mother State Park in Virginia for 13 years now, and I thought I'd seen everything these mountains could throw at me. I was wrong. Before I became a ranger, I was a nurse for 8 years. I worked in the emergency room at the regional hospital, dealing with everything from heart attacks to car crashes. You learn to stay calm when things get bad. You learn to look for medical reasons when people act strange. That training saved lives, but it also made me doubt things that couldn't be explained with science. My family has lived in these mountains for 7 generations. My great-great-grandfather made moonshine during Prohibition, hiding his still in caves that I now guide tourists past. The old folks always told stories about the mountain, scary tales meant to keep children from wandering too far into the woods, stories about the hungry mother. Everyone around here knows the legend. Long ago, a native woman and her child got lost in these mountains during a harsh winter. Food ran out. The woman ate anything she could find to survive: bark, roots, leather. But it wasn't enough. When the hunger got bad enough, well, the story says she ate things no person should eat. The mountain and lake got their names from her desperate attempt to survive. I never believed it. As a nurse, I knew what starvation did to people. I knew how hypothermia could make someone act crazy. I'd seen people with low blood sugar become violent and confused. There were always medical reasons for strange behavior. February 1985 brought the worst winter I'd ever seen. Snow piled up 6 feet deep. The temperature dropped to 20 below zero, colder than it had been in 50 years. For the first time since 1940, the lake froze solid. You could walk across it, though I wouldn't recommend it. The phone lines went down during an ice storm. Our radio barely worked because of the mountains blocking the signal. The main road to town was buried under snow and fallen trees. We were cut off from the outside world, 15 miles from the nearest hospital. I lived alone in the ranger housing near the park office. Being divorced with no kids, I didn't mind the quiet. After years of hospital noise and city stress, the mountain silence felt peaceful. Even during the worst storms, I felt safe in my little cabin with its wood stove and well-stocked pantry. That all changed when the Henderson family went missing. The Hendersons lived in a cabin about 5 miles up the mountain from the main park area. They were true mountain people, the kind who chopped their own wood, grew their own food, and could survive anything nature threw at them. Jim Henderson was a Vietnam vet who'd come home and wanted nothing more than to live quietly with his wife Martha and their 3 kids. Their nearest neighbor, old Pete Garrett, hiked over on his snowshoes to check on them. He said he'd seen smoke from their chimney 4 days earlier, but nothing since. That worried him. The Hendersons always kept their fire going during cold snaps like this. I tried to radio the county sheriff, but got nothing but static. The phones were still dead. I'd have to go check on them myself. I loaded my snowmobile with medical supplies, hypothermia blankets, glucose tablets, and IV fluids in case someone was sick. I also packed extra food, water, and emergency flares. As a ranger and former nurse, I'd handled plenty of winter emergencies. Usually it was just a family running low on firewood or someone with cabin fever getting anxious. The ride up the mountain took an hour through snow that reached my waist in places. The woods were dead quiet. No bird calls, no wind through the trees, no animal tracks anywhere. Even the hardies, mountain creatures, seemed to be hiding from this cold. As I got closer to the Henderson cabin, something felt wrong. The forest felt too still, like it was holding its breath. My snowmobile started running rough, the engine overheating despite the freezing air. I had to stop twice to let it cool down. When I finally saw the cabin through the trees, I knew this wasn't going to be a normal rescue call. The front door hung off its hinges, and something had torn it open from the inside. I turned off the snowmobile and grabbed my medical kit. The silence hit me like a wall. No smoke from the chimney. No sounds from inside the house. Just the creak of tree branches weighted down with ice. The cabin looked like a tornado had hit it. Furniture was overturned and smashed. Someone had torn the kitchen cupboards apart and every scrap of food was gone. I mean everything. Flour, sugar, pet food, even a bar of soap had bite marks in it. But what really got to me were the teeth marks on the wooden kitchen table. Human teeth, but gouged deep into the oak like someone had been trying to eat the wood itself. I called out, "Hello? Henderson family? It's Ranger Sutton." My voice echoed strangely in the empty cabin. No answer. In the bedroom, I found children's clothes scattered everywhere. Little Sarah Henderson's pink winter coat was shredded, lying in a corner with dark stains on it. The beds looked like wild animals had been nesting in them. I checked every room, looking for signs of what happened. In what used to be the pantry, someone had chewed through leather boots, actual bite marks right through the tough cowhide. My medical training kicked in. Maybe the family had gotten some kind of food poisoning that made them act crazy, or maybe hypothermia had driven them to do desperate things. But then I stepped outside and saw the footprints. They were human-shaped, but way too big. 18 inches long with claw marks at the tips where toes should be. The prints led away from the cabin toward the deeper woods, and they were still sharp despite the falling snow. Whatever made them had passed by recently. I followed the trail for about 100 yards. The prints got deeper and wider apart, like whatever was making them had started moving faster. Then I found Sarah's mitten. The little red mitten was torn and bloody, hanging from a branch about 7 feet off the ground. How does a 6-year-old's mitten end up that high? And where was Sarah? I heard something then, a sound that made my blood freeze. It was crying, a child crying somewhere deeper in the woods. "Sarah? Sarah, is that you?" I shouted. The crying stopped. Then I heard it again, but from a different direction, then from behind me. The sound seemed to move around me in a circle, but I never saw who was making it. My radio crackled to life. Through the static, I heard a man's voice. "Help! So hungry. Please." "This is Ranger Sutton," I said into the radio. "Who is this? Where are you?" The voice came back, clearer now. "Becky, help us. We're so hungry." I recognized the voice. It was Jim Henderson. But something was wrong with it. It sounded stretched, like someone was pulling his words apart. "Jim, where are you? I'm at your cabin. Where's your family?" The radio went quiet for a long moment. Then I heard Martha Henderson's voice. "Becky, bring food. Bring lots of food." But Martha's voice was coming from the same radio transmission as Jim's, like they were speaking at exactly the same time. That's impossible with handheld radios. I was starting to get scared, which wasn't like me. 13 years as a ranger, 8 years as a nurse, I'd seen people in all kinds of bad situations. But this felt different. I decided to head back to my cabin and try to contact the sheriff's office. Maybe their radio had better range than mine. But as I walked back to my snowmobile, I saw more of those impossible footprints circling around where I'd parked. The engine wouldn't start. It was like something had drained the battery, even though it had been fine an hour earlier. I popped the hood and found claw marks scratched deep into the metal. Engine block. I was 5 miles from home in 20 below weather with no transportation. As the sun started to set, I heard the crying again. This time it was closer, and I could make out words. "Mama. I'm so hungry, Mama." It was definitely Sarah Henderson's voice. But when I looked toward the sound, I saw something moving between the trees that was way too tall to be a 6-year-old girl. I had 2 choices. Try to walk home in the dark through snow that would reach my chest, or spend the night in the destroyed Henderson cabin. Both options terrified me, but at least the cabin had walls. I barricaded the broken front door with the kitchen table and built a fire in the wood stove. The flames gave me some light and warmth, but they also made shadows dance on the walls in ways that made me jumpy. I rationed out some energy bars from my pack and tried to think this through logically. A family of 5 had vanished. Their cabin had been torn apart from the inside. There were footprints too big to be human and claw marks on my snowmobile. My medical training suggested several possibilities. Mass food poisoning causing hallucinations, hypothermia-induced psychosis, or maybe a rabid bear that had broken into the cabin while the family was away. People could do crazy things when their brains weren't getting enough oxygen or glucose. But rabid bears don't use radios. Around midnight, I heard footsteps on the cabin roof. Slow, heavy steps that made the whole building creak. Something was walking around up there, and from the sound it was big. The footsteps stopped right above where I was sitting. Then I heard scratching, long, deliberate scratches like fingernails dragging across wood. "Who's up there?" I called out. The scratching stopped. Then I heard Jim Henderson's voice muffled by the roof. "Becky, come outside. We have food to share." I knew that wasn't really Jay. Jim was a quiet man who called me Ranger Sutton or Ma'am. He would never ask me to come outside in the middle of a blizzard. "Jim, come down and talk to me through the door," I said. "It's too cold to go outside." The voice came back, but this time it was Martha. "Please, Becky, we're having dinner. The children are so hungry." Then I heard all 3 kids' voices at once. "Come eat with us, Miss Becky. We saved you some." That's when I knew for certain that whatever was on my roof wasn't human. The Henderson family was either dead or somewhere else entirely. The footsteps moved around the cabin in a circle, and I heard the voices coming from different directions. Sometimes Jim's voice, sometimes Martha's, sometimes the children. But they all said the same thing. "Come outside, share our food. We're so hungry." I kept the fire burning and my back to the wall. Around 3 in the morning, something tried to push in the barricaded door. The kitchen table scraped across the floor, and I heard breathing on the other side, deep, raspy breathing that sounded like air being pulled through a narrow pipe. "Let me in, Becky," said Sarah's tiny voice. "I'm cold and scared." I wanted to open that door. Every instinct as a former nurse told me to help a scared child. But I remembered that mitten hanging 7 feet up in a tree. "Sarah, where are your parents?" I asked. "They're here with me. We're all here. We want to share our food with you." "What kind of food?" There was a long pause. When the voice came back, it didn't sound quite like Sarah anymore. "Good food. Warm food. The kind that fills you up." The pushing on the door got stronger. The table started sliding away from the entrance despite my weight against it. I could see fingers, long white fingers with black nails, curling around the doorframe. I grabbed a burning log from the fire and held it like a weapon. "Stay back. I'm armed." The pushing stopped. The fingers disappeared. Then I heard something I'll never forget. Laughter. It started as Sarah's giggle, but it got deeper and hungrier until it sounded like an animal growling. At sunrise, the sound stopped. I waited another hour before moving the table and cracking open the door. The snow outside was trampled down, and there were those impossible footprints everywhere, but no sign of whatever had been trying to get in. My radio crackled to life. "Becky, this is Sheriff Crawford. Do you copy?" I nearly cried with relief. "Jim, I copy. I'm at the Henderson cabin. The family's missing and something's very wrong up here." "I know," the sheriff said. "We've been getting reports of strange activity all over the mountain. I'm sending a team up to get you. Can you make it to the main trail?" "My snowmobile's broken down. I'll have to walk." "Negative. Stay put. We'll come to you. And Becky, whatever you do, don't trust any voices you hear in the woods. We've had 3 other families report people calling to them from outside their cabins at night." The radio went dead. I packed up my gear and got ready to wait for rescue. But as I stepped outside the cabin, I saw fresh footprints leading away into the woods. And written in the snow, in what looked like a child's handwriting, were the words, "Thank you for the food." I hadn't given anyone any food. Sheriff Jim Crawford arrived 2 hours later with Deputy Sarah Mills and a local man I recognized, Tommy Mullins, whose family had lived on the mountain even longer than mine. They came on snowmobiles, armed and looking worried. "Becky, you look like hell," the sheriff said as I climbed onto the back of his machine. "I haven't slept much." "Jim, we need to search for the Henderson family. They're out there somewhere and something's hunting them." Tommy Mullins spoke up. "They ain't out there anymore, Ranger Sutton. They've been taken." "Taken by what?" "By the hungry mother. She's woken up again." Sheriff Crawford gave Tommy a hard look. "We'll discuss theories later. Right now, we need to search the area and look for evidence." We spent the morning following those impossible tracks through the woods. The trail led us to an old abandoned mine shaft about 2 miles from the Henderson cabin. The opening was hidden behind a wall of ice and snow, but something had recently broken through. Deputy Mills shined her flashlight into the darkness. "There's something down there. Looks like clothing." We rappelled down into the mine. What we found at the bottom still gives me nightmares. It was a nest made from furniture, chairs and tables from the Henderson cabin, arranged in a rough circle. But mixed in with the furniture were clothes. Lots of clothes. Not just from the Henderson family, but from other families too. Some of the clothes looked old, like they'd been there for years. In the center of the nest was a pile of bones. Not animal bones. The wrong shape, the wrong size. "Jesus," Deputy Mills whispered. "How many people?" Tommy Mullins was examining the bones with his flashlight. "This goes back generations. Every hard winter she wakes up. Every 20, 30 years when the cold gets bad enough and food gets scarce enough." "Who wakes up?" I asked. Tommy looked at me with eyes that had seen too much. "My great-grandmother, the original hungry mother." He told us the real story then, how his ancestor had been a Cherokee woman married to a white trader. When a terrible winter hit in the 1840s, she and her children had been trapped in these mountains for months. The trader never came back, probably died somewhere in the snow. "She ate everything she could find," Tommy said. "Bark, roots, leather. When that ran out, she ate other things. It changed her, made her into something that ain't quite human anymore." "That's impossible," I said. "People don't just transform into monsters." "Extreme hunger can do things to the mind," Deputy Mills added. "Starvation can cause hallucinations, violent behavior." Tommy shook his head. "This ain't about psychology. This is about what happens when a person gets so desperate, so hungry, that they're willing to do anything to survive. The mountain remembers that hunger, and every time conditions get bad enough, it wakes up." Sheriff Crawford had been quiet, examining the bones. Now he looked up at us with a grim expression. "These aren't old bones. Some of them are fresh, very fresh." That's when we heard the voice echoing up from deeper in the mine. Come down here. There's plenty of food. Plenty for everyone." It was Jim Henderson's voice, but it was coming from too far down in the mine shaft for any human to survive the fall. "We're leaving," Sheriff Crawford said. "Now." But as we started to climb back up, our ropes began to fray. Something was cutting them from above. We were trapped in the mine with whatever was mimicking Jim Henderson's voice. The temperature in the mine shaft began to rise, even though it was still 20 below outside. I could see our breath steaming in the suddenly warm air. "Look," Deputy Mills whispered. At the far end of the mine tunnel, something was moving toward us. It walked upright like a person, but it was too tall and too thin. Its arms hung down to its knees, and its fingers ended in claws that scraped against the rock walls as it approached. When it got close enough for our flashlights to illuminate it fully, I saw the most horrible thing I've ever witnessed. It had Martha Henderson's face, but stretched and distorted like taffy. Sarah's bright blue eyes stared out from sockets that were too large. Jim's voice came from its throat, but the mouth was filled with teeth that had been filed to points. "So hungry," it said in a voice that was all 5 members of the Henderson family speaking at once. "Always so hungry. But you brought food." It was looking at us. Tommy Mullins stepped forward. "Great-grandmother, it's me. Tommy Mullins. Your blood." The creature tilted its head. When it spoke again, it was in an old woman's voice. "Little Tommy, you've grown so big. Are you hungry, child? I have food to share." "I know you do," Tommy said softly. "But these folks ain't for eating. Let them go." The creature moved closer, and I could smell it now. The sweet, sick smell of rotting meat. "They came to my mountain during the hungry season. They brought themselves to feed me." Tommy reached into his pack and pulled out something I hadn't expected, a bag of deer jerky and some canned goods. "Here, this should help." The creature looked at the food with an expression of desperate longing, but then it shook its head. "Not enough. Never enough. The hunger is too big now." That's when I understood what Tommy was really doing. He was buying us time. "Run," he whispered to us. "When I give the signal, climb those ropes fast as you can." "What about you?" I asked. Tommy Mullins looked at me with the saddest smile I'd ever seen. "Someone's got to feed her enough to make her sleep again. Someone she won't hunt later." He threw the food at the creature's feet. As it bent down to devour the jerky, Tommy shouted, "Now!" We climbed faster than I thought possible. Behind us, I could hear Tommy talking to his great-grandmother in Cherokee, words I didn't understand, but that sounded like a lullaby. The last thing I heard before we reached the surface was Tommy screaming. We sealed the mine shaft with dynamite from the sheriff's emergency supplies. It took 3 charges to bring down enough rock to block the opening completely. "Will that hold it?" Deputy Mills asked. "For now," I said, "until the next bad winter." We found the Henderson family's truck buried under snow about a mile from their cabin. All 5 bodies were inside, frozen solid. They'd probably died of carbon monoxide poisoning. Ran the engine too long trying to stay warm while the exhaust pipe was blocked with snow. The official report said Tommy Mullins died in a mining accident while helping with the search. The Henderson family died of exposure during the blizzard. I was treated for hypothermia and exhaustion. Nobody mentioned the creature in the mine. Nobody talked about the voices on the radio or the impossible footprints. Some things are better left out of official reports. I quit the Ranger Service 3 months later. Couldn't handle being alone in those mountains anymore, especially during winter. I moved to town and became a paramedic, but I never lost the weight I dropped during those 3 days on the mountain. My metabolism just never worked right again. Sometimes I still wake up hungry in the middle of the night. Not normal hungry, the kind of hunger that makes you want to eat everything in the refrigerator and then start on the furniture. I have to remind myself that I'm safe, that I'm not starving, that I'm not trapped on a frozen mountain with something that used to be human. The worst part is that I understand it now. That desperate, clawing hunger that makes you willing to do anything, eat anything, become anything to survive. I felt it myself in that mine shaft, just for a moment. The desire to take a bite out of Deputy Mills's arm. The urge to crack open Tommy's bones and suck out the marrow. I fought it off, but I know it's still in there somewhere, waiting for the next time I get really hungry, waiting for the next bad winter. They rebuilt the trail past the old mine shaft last year, put up a nice wooden sign that says, Hungry Mother Nature Trail, and talks about the Cherokee legend. Families bring their kids to hike there now, especially during winter when the lake freezes over. I've tried to warn the current rangers, but they think I'm just a crazy old lady with PTSD from my accident. They don't believe the stories about voices in the woods or footprints too big to be human. Maybe they're right. Maybe it was all hypothermia and stress and a guilty conscience over Tommy Mullen's death. But every winter, when the temperature drops below zero and the snow gets deep enough, I check the local news for reports of missing hikers on Hungry Mother Mountain. So far, the families have all been found safe. So far. But winter's coming early this year, and it's supposed to be a bad one. The meteorologists are calling it a once-in-a-generation storm system. I'm already stocking up on canned goods, just in case. My name is Michael O'Brien, but everyone calls me Mick. I've been a ranger at Roan Mountain State Park for 9 years now, and I thought I'd seen everything these mountains could throw at me. I was wrong. Let me tell you something about myself first, so you understand why this story is so hard for me to tell. My great-grandfather came over from Ireland during the potato famine, bringing nothing but stories about banshees and other spooky stuff. My grandmother used to tell me these tales when I was little, about wailing women who showed up before someone died, crying and moaning in the night. I never believed any of it. Not one word. See, I'm what you'd call a practical man. I left construction work to become a ranger because I loved being outdoors, not because I believed in ghosts. At 32, I've got red hair, freckles all over my face, and I'm built like a fire plug. My wife Linda always jokes that I look more like a truck driver than someone who spends his days on mountain trails. Roan Mountain sits right on the border between Tennessee and North Carolina. At 6,285 feet, it's the highest point on the Appalachian Trail in Tennessee. Most of the mountain is covered in what we call balds, big grassy areas with no trees, just rolling green hills that look like Ireland, or so my grandmother used to say. The wind up there never stops, and when it gets going, it can knock a man right off his feet. I take care of a 23-mile stretch of the Appalachian Trail. That's a lot of ground to cover, especially when you're doing it mostly on foot. The trail winds through thick forests of spruce and fir trees, across those open balds and around rocky areas where the rhododendrons bloom so thick in June you can barely see the sky. It was March of 1978 when everything changed. We'd been having weird weather. One day it would be warm enough for shorts, the next day snow showers would be falling. The mountains do that to weather, twist it up and make it angry. But this storm was different. It came out of nowhere, black clouds rolling in like they had somewhere important to be. That morning I was sitting in the ranger station drinking coffee and looking over some paperwork when the phone rang. It was Sally from the visitor center down in the valley. "Mick," she said, and I could hear the worry in her voice. "We've got 3 women who were supposed to check in yesterday. They signed the trail register at Carver's Gap 2 days ago, said they were heading up to Roan High Knob for an overnight trip." I looked out the window at the dark clouds building up over the ridgeline. "What's their experience level?" They seemed to know what they were doing. Had good gear, proper maps. One of them said she'd hiked the Smokies before. But experience doesn't mean much when a mountain decides it wants you. I've seen seasoned hikers make stupid mistakes, and I've seen weekend warriors get lucky in situations that should have killed them. The mountains don't care how many patches you've got on your backpack. "I'll head up and take a look," I told Sally. "Radio's been acting up in this weather, but I'll check in every hour." I gathered my gear: rescue pack, first aid kit, extra food and water, emergency blankets. My radio was one of those old Motorola units that worked great in good weather, but got all staticky when storms moved in. The GPS units were new technology back then, expensive and not very reliable, so I stuck with my compass and the topographical maps I knew by heart. As I headed up the trail, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Not just the weather, though that was bad enough. The woods were too quiet. No birds singing, no squirrels chattering, even the wind seemed muted. It felt like the whole mountain was holding its breath. I'd be in hiking for about an hour when I heard it for the first time. A woman crying. The sound was faint at first, almost lost in the wind, but it was definitely there. A woman's voice, high and mournful, like she'd lost everything that mattered to her. I stopped walking and listened hard, trying to figure out which direction it was coming from. Mountains play tricks with sound. An echo can bounce around for miles, making you think something's right next to you when it's actually on the next ridge over. But this wasn't an echo. This was fresh grief, raw and real. "Hello," I called out. "This is Park Service. Are you hurt?" The crying stopped. I waited a full minute, then called out again. Nothing. Just the wind picking up through the trees and the first fat raindrops starting to fall. I marked my location on the map and kept moving toward where the 3 women were supposed to be camping. The rain started coming down harder, turning the trail slick and muddy. I'd hiked this path hundreds of times, knew every rock and route, but something felt different. Wrong. The trail markers seemed to be in the wrong places, and twice I had to double-check my compass because I could have sworn I was heading south when I should have been going north. About 2 miles from Carver's Gap, I found their first campsite. The fire ring was cold and wet, but there were clear signs they'd been there. Boot prints in the mud, a piece of orange flagging tape tied to a tree branch, smart girls marking their path. But the campsite felt empty in a way that had nothing to do with them being gone. I was looking around for more clues when I heard the crying again. This time it was closer, and I could make out more than one voice. 3 women, crying together like they were at a funeral. "Hello," I shouted. "I'm here to help. Where are you?" The voices stopped again, but this time I heard something else. Footsteps in the wet leaves, moving away from me fast. I crashed through the underbrush toward the sound, pushing past low-hanging branches and jumping over fallen logs. I came out into a small hill clearing and stopped dead. There were 3 women standing about 50 yards away, their backs to me. They wore long gray dresses that seemed to move in the wind, and their hair hung down past their waists. Something about the way they stood, perfectly still like statues, made the hair on my neck stand up. "Ma'am," I called out, "are you the hikers from Carver's Gap?" They didn't turn around, didn't even move, just stood there facing away from me while the rain poured down. I started walking toward them, my boots squelching in the muddy ground. "My name's Mick O'Brien. I'm a park ranger. We've been looking for you." That's when one of them turned around. I've seen a lot of things in 9 years of mountain rescue. I've pulled bodies out of ravines, found hikers who'd been lost for days and were barely alive, seen what exposure and fear can do to a person. But I'd never seen anything like this. The woman's face was pale as moonlight, and her eyes were the darkest things I'd ever seen. Tears streamed down her cheeks, but they weren't normal tears. They seemed to glow, leaving silver tracks on her skin. She opened her mouth like she was going to speak, but what came out wasn't words. It was a wail that cut right through me, a sound of grief so deep and terrible that my knees nearly buckled. The other 2 women turned then, and they had the same pale faces, the same impossible dark eyes, the same silver tears. All 3 of them opened their mouths, and that awful keening sound filled the clearing. I stumbled backward, my hand automatically going to my radio. "Base, this is O'Brien. I need backup up here. Something's not right." Static. Nothing but static. The wailing got louder, and now I could hear words in it. Not English. Something older, something that sounded like the Irish my great-grandmother used to mutter when she thought no one was listening. The women started wise, alking toward me, not hurrying, just moving with that same awful stillness. I did what any sensible person would do. I ran. I crashed back through the woods the way I'd come. Branches, tearing at my jacket and rain stinging my face. Behind me, the wailing continued, but it seemed to be coming from everywhere now. Ahead of me, behind me, on both sides, like the whole mountain was crying. When I finally stopped running, I was back at the trail, gasping for breath and shaking like a leaf. I tried the radio again, got the same static, then checked my compass. The needle was spinning in slow circles, unable to find magnetic north. That's when I knew I was in real trouble. I forced myself to calm down and think like a ranger instead of a scared civilian. There had to be a rational explanation. Maybe the women were in shock, suffering from exposure. People did strange things when they were hypothermic. Hallucinations were common, and the compass problem could be explained by the electrical storm moving in overhead. But deep down, in a part of me that remembered my grandmother's stories, I knew I was lying to myself. I was still standing there trying to make sense of what I'd seen when the wind brought me a new sound. Not wailing this time, but voices talking low and urgent. Normal voices. Human voices. Following the sound, I found Bill Murphy about a quarter-mile down the trail. Bill was another ranger, an older guy who'd been working these mountains since before I was born. He had 2 other men with him, a local volunteer named Jake and Dr. Sarah McKenzie from the university, who studied mountain folklore and sometimes helped with search and rescue. "Mick," Bill called out when he saw me. "Thank God. We lost radio contact an hour ago." "Radio's not working up here," I said. "And Bill, we've got a problem. I found something. I'm not sure what I found." Dr. McKenzie looked at me sharply. She was a small woman with gray hair and sharp blue eyes that didn't miss much. "What kind of something?" I told them about the crying, about the 3 women in gray dresses, about the way they looked and the sounds they made. By the time I finished, Jake was looking at me like I'd lost my mind, but Bill and Dr. McKenzie were nodding. "How much Irish do you remember from your grandmother?" Dr. McKenzie asked. "Not much. Why?" "Because what you heard, that wailing, we call it keening. It's a traditional Irish funeral song. Women used to sing it when someone died." "But nobody's died," I said. "We're looking for 3 missing hikers." Dr. McKenzie and Bill exchanged a look that made my stomach drop. "Mick," Bill said quietly, "in the old stories, banshees don't keen for the dead. They keen for those who are about to die." The storm hit us like a freight train. One minute we were standing on the trail talking about banshees and Irish folklore. The next minute the wind was howling at 80 miles an hour, and the rain was coming down so hard it felt like being inside a waterfall. We huddled together under the biggest pine tree we could find, but it wasn't much shelter. "We need to get off this ridge," Bill shouted over the wind. "This lightning's going to fry us." But when we looked around, nothing looked right. The trail that had been clear as day 5 minutes ago seemed to have disappeared. The trees all looked the same, dark and twisted in the storm. Even worse, my compass was still spinning, and Jake's was doing the same thing. "Which way?" Jake yelled. Before anyone could answer, we heard the keening again. Louder this time, cutting through the storm like it was nothing. And it was coming from 3 different directions at once. Dr. McKenzie grabbed my arm. Her face was pale, but her voice was steady. "Mick, I need you to listen to me very carefully. In Irish tradition, when banshees appear to someone, it means death is coming for their family. But when they appear to a whole group—" "What?" I shouted. "It means everyone present is going to die." The keening got louder, and now I could see shapes moving between the trees. Not just 3 women this time, but dozens of them. They seemed to float through the forest. Their gray dresses untouched by the rain, their faces glowing with that same pale light. "This way." Bill pointed toward what looked like a gap in the trees. "There's a shelter down there." We ran through the storm, crashing through underbrush and jumping over fallen branches. The keening followed us, sometimes ahead, sometimes behind, always that same mournful sound that made my bones ache. Lightning flashed constantly now, turning the forest into a nightmare of stark shadows and blinding light. I was running beside Jake when it happened. 1 second he was right there next to me, the next second he was gone. I stopped and spun around, calling his name, but the only answer was that terrible wailing sound. "Jake!" I screamed into the storm. A flash of lightning lit up the forest, and I saw him. He was standing about 30 yards away, perfectly still, staring at something I couldn't see. His face had gone completely blank, like no one was home anymore. "Jake, come on!" I started toward him, but Dr. Mackenzie caught my arm. "Don't," she said. "Look at his eyes." I looked. Jake's eyes were solid black, like holes cut out of his head, and he was crying those same silver tears I'd seen on the women in gray. The keening sound was coming from him now. "We have to help him," I said. But even as I spoke, Jake turned and walked into the dark forest. The wailing faded as he disappeared between the trees. "He's gone," Bill said quietly. "Whatever those things are, they've got him." We found the shelter 20 minutes later, a little stone building that the Park Service had put up for emergency situations. It was barely big enough for the three of us, but it was solid and dry. We huddled inside while the storm raged outside, and I tried to make sense of what was happening. "This is crazy," I kept saying. "None of this is real. People don't just disappear. Banshees don't exist." Our Irish blood knows better," Dr. Mackenzie said. She was digging through her pack and pulled out an old book. "I've been studying Celtic folklore for 30 years, Mick. This mountain is full of Irish and Scottish immigrants who brought their beliefs with them. Sometimes in places where the veil is thin." "The veil?" "Between our world and the other one. Sometimes things cross over." Bill was checking his rifle, making sure it was loaded. "Doc's right. I've heard stories from other rangers, older guys who worked these mountains back in the 50s and 60s. Strange disappearances during storms. People found days later with no memory of where they'd been. If they were found at all," Dr. Mackenzie added. The storm was getting worse instead of better. Through the small window of the shelter, I could see trees bending almost to the ground. But worse than the wind was the keening. It seemed to be coming from everywhere now, a chorus of voices singing that mournful song in a language I almost understood. "They're calling to us," Dr. Mackenzie said, "trying to draw us out." "Why?" I asked. "Because that's what banshees do. They're not evil exactly. They're mourners, but they can't mourn the living, only the dead. So they make sure there's someone to mourn," I finished. A new sound joined the keening. Laughter. Not happy laughter, but the kind that comes from someone who's lost their mind. It was Jake's voice, but it didn't sound like Jake anymore. "Come out, Mick," he called through the storm. "Come out and join us. It's beautiful out here. You can see everything so clearly." I looked through the window and almost stopped breathing. Jake was standing in the clearing in front of the shelter, but he wasn't alone. The women in gray surrounded him, dozens of them, all with those pale faces and dark eyes. They were dancing now, spinning in circles while the wind howled around them. And behind them, barely visible in the storm, I could see three other figures. Three women in modern hiking clothes, their faces slack and their eyes black as night, the missing hikers. "They're alive," I whispered. "No," Dr. Mackenzie said sadly. "They're not. Not anymore." Jake called out again, his voice getting closer to the shelter. "Mick! You can't hide forever. Come out and meet your family." That's when I saw her. Standing at the edge of the circle, separate from the others, was an old woman in a black shawl. She looked exactly like my great-grandmother, down to the small gold cross she always wore around her neck. She was staring right at me through the window. My great-grandmother raised one finger and pointed at me, then at her own throat. She opened her mouth and began to keen, and the sound that came out was my name, stretched into a wail of grief that seemed to last forever. "She's keening for you specifically," Dr. Mackenzie whispered. "That means you're the primary target. These banshees, they're your family's banshees, Mick. They've found you." I stared at the old woman through the rain-streaked window. She looked exactly like the pictures I'd seen of my great-grandmother, who'd died when I was 10. Even her clothes were right. That black shawl she used to wrap around her shoulders when she sat by the fire telling stories about the old country. "But she's been dead for over 20 years, I said. "Death doesn't mean much to banshees," Dr. Mackenzie said. "They exist to mourn the O'Brien family. Every O'Brien who dies, every O'Brien who's about to die. That's their purpose." The keening was getting louder, and now I could make out words. Irish words, but somehow I understood them. They were singing about death coming for the noble bear. That's what O'Brien means in Irish. Noble bear. They were singing about a red-haired man who would join his ancestors on the mountain. They were singing about me. There has to be a way to stop this, I said. Bill checked his rifle again. We could try shooting our way out. Bullets won't work, Dr. Mackenzie said. But there might be another way. Mick, do you remember any of the Irish your grandmother taught you? A little. Some songs, some prayers. Traditional songs. Ones about death or mourning. I thought back to those long evenings when I was small, sitting by the fire while my grandmother's voice rose and fell in ancient melodies. She used to sing a song about sailors lost at sea, and another one about saying goodbye to the dead. That's it. Dr. Mackenzie grabbed my hands. Banshees respond to proper mourning, Mick, but it has to be done right, by family, in the old way. If you can keen for the dead properly, really properly, with all the respect and grief they deserve, they might let us go. But I don't know how. Your blood knows, she said. Your family's blood. It's been passed down for generations, even if you've forgotten it. But you have to mean it. You have to really mourn for those 3 hikers, really grieve for them as if they were your own family. The keening outside was reaching a fever pitch. Through the window, I could see Jake dancing with the gray women, his movements jerky like a puppet on strings. The 3 missing hikers stood perfectly still in the center of the circle, their black eyes reflecting the lightning. My great-grandmother stepped closer to the window and spoke in Irish. Somehow I understood every word. Come home, Michael. Come home to your family. There's no pain here, no fear, no worry about the future, just peace and the singing, forever and ever. It was tempting, more tempting than I wanted to admit. The last 9 years had been hard, long hours, difficult rescues, constant worry about people getting hurt or lost in the mountains. And recently, Linda and I had been talking about starting a family, which meant more worry, more responsibility. But I thought about Linda waiting for me at home, probably pacing the floor and watching the storm through the kitchen window. I thought about the 3 hikers who'd come up here for a simple overnight trip and ended up, whatever, they'd ended up. I stood up and walked to the door of the shelter. Mick, don't, Bill said. I have to try. I looked back at Dr. Mackenzie. If this doesn't work, it will work, she said firmly. Trust your blood, Mick. Trust your family. I opened the door and stepped out into the storm. The wind hit me like a physical blow, but I forced myself to walk toward the circle of gray women. The keening stopped as I approached, and they all turned to look at me with those terrible dark eyes. My great-grandmother stepped forward and spoke again in Irish. This time, she was asking me to join them willingly, to take my place in the family of mourners. Instead, I knelt down in the mud and began to sing. It was my grandmother's song about the sailors lost at sea, but as I sang it, the words changed. Instead of sailors, I sang about 3 young women who'd come to the mountains seeking beauty and peace. I sang about their families waiting at home, about their dreams that would never come true, about all the sunrises they'd never see. And I meant every word. The tears that ran down my face were real. Those 3 hikers had been real people with real lives, and now they were gone. It didn't matter that I'd never met them. They were human beings who deserved to be mourned properly, not turned into puppets for supernatural forces. As I sang, something amazing happened. The gray women began to fade, becoming translucent, then nearly invisible. The 3 missing hikers blinked, and their eyes cleared. They looked around in confusion, seeing the storm and the forest as if for the first time. But my great-grandmother remained solid and real. She walked over to where I knelt and put her hand on my head, the same way she used to when I was small. You remember, she said in English now. You remember what it means to be O'Brien. Yes, I said. I remember. She smiled then, and for a moment she looked just like she had when I was little, kind and warm and full of love. The mountain will let you go now, all of you. But remember this, Michael. Remember that death is part of life, and grief is part of love. Don't forget your family again. She faded away like morning mist, and the keening stopped. The storm broke as suddenly as it had started. One moment we were in the middle of a hurricane, the next moment the rain stopped and stars were shining through the clouds. The three missing hikers sat in the mud, staring around in shock but very much alive and very much themselves again. Jake came stumbling back through the trees, looking confused but unhurt. He couldn't remember anything after we'd started running from the shelter, and when we told him what had happened, he just shook his head. "Banshees," he said. "In Tennessee. Who would have thought?" We got everyone off the mountain safely. The official report said that 3 hikers had been found suffering from exposure and mild hypothermia after being caught in an unexpected storm. Jake's temporary disorientation was attributed to a minor head injury from a falling branch. The equipment failures, compasses spinning, radios full of static, were explained as electromagnetic interference from the unusual weather. Nobody mentioned the wailing women in gray dresses, but I know what really happened up there, and more importantly, I understand why it happened. I'd spent 32 years running away from my Irish heritage, dismissing my grandmother's stories as old-world superstition. I'd rejected everything that made me O'Brien except the name. The Banshees came to remind me who I was. I started learning Irish that summer. Real Irish, not just the few words my grandmother had taught me. I learned the old songs, the traditional mourning chants, the proper ways to honor the dead. Linda thought I'd lost my mind at first, but when I told her the whole story, and I mean the real whole story, she understood. We named our first daughter Bridget after my great-grandmother. I still work at Roan Mountain State Park, still hike that same 23-mile section of the Appalachian Trail. But I'm different now. When hikers ask me about the local folklore, I don't dismiss it anymore. I tell them about the Scots-Irish settlers who brought their beliefs to these mountains, about the thin places where our world touches something older and stranger. And sometimes, on clear nights when the wind is blowing just right across the balds, I still hear them singing. Not the terrible keening that called me to join them, but something softer, lullabies maybe, or songs of blessing. The voices of women who've been keeping watch over these mountains for generations, making sure that no one dies alone and unmourned. I never see them anymore, but I know they're there. My family's there. All the O'Brien women going back to the old country, standing guard over the people they love. And you know what? That doesn't scare me anymore. It comforts me. My name is Joe Nighthorse, and I've been a park ranger for 16 years. I work at Blood Mountain in Georgia, the highest point on the Appalachian Trail. People think being a ranger is just about giving directions and checking permits, but it's not. Up here, you protect things that most folks don't even know exist. I'm half Cherokee, half German. My Cherokee grandmother raised me when my parents died in a car crash. She taught me the old ways, how to track, how to listen to the forest, how to respect the spirits that live in sacred places. But I also went to college, got a degree in forestry. I believe in science, in facts you can measure and prove. Blood Mountain has always been special to the Cherokee. We call it a sacred place where young warriors came for vision quests. The old stories say a shadow walker guards the mountain, a shapeshifter that protects our holy ground. My grandmother still believes those stories. Me? I figured they were just tales to teach kids about respecting nature. That was before September 1996, before I learned that some stories are more than just stories. It started with the fog. September in Georgia usually brings clear, crisp days perfect for hiking. But that month, thick fog rolled in every morning and stayed until noon. The temperature at the summit was 20 degrees colder than it should have been. Weather Service couldn't explain it. Then the animals started acting strange. Bears avoided the summit completely. Birds stopped singing near the top. Even the bugs stayed away. In 16 years of ranger work, I'd never seen anything like it. My grandmother noticed it too. She lived in a small cabin at the base of the mountain, and she started having dreams. Bad dreams about angry spirits and blood on the rocks. "Joseph," she told me one morning using my Cherokee name, "something is waking up on our mountain, something that's been Samsel, leaping for a long time." I thought it was just her age talking. She was 83, and sometimes old people see patterns that aren't really there. I kissed her forehead and went to work, checking my radio and GPS like always. The first hiker died on a Tuesday morning in mid-September. His name was Marcus Caldwell, a 35-year-old accountant from Atlanta. Day hiker, well-equipped, experienced on the trails. He'd registered at the trailhead at 6 a.m., planning to summit and return by afternoon. When he didn't come back by dark, we started looking. Found his body just before dawn on Wednesday, sitting cross-legged on the summit rocks in perfect Cherokee prayer position. No injuries, no signs of struggle. The coroner said heart attack, but Marcus was healthy, young, athletic. What bothered me were the footprints around his body. Bare feet, human-shaped, but huge, at least size 15. The prints were deep, like whoever made them weighed 300 pounds or more, but they just appeared around Marcus and disappeared at the edge of the rocks. No trail leading in or out. The other thing was the cold. The summit was freezing, literally. Ice crystals formed on the rocks in September heat. My breath came out in puffs. 20 feet down the trail, the temperature was normal. I called it in, did the paperwork, figured some vagrant had come across the body and positioned it that way. People do weird things sometimes. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Really wrong. That night, my grandmother didn't sleep. She sat on her porch, singing old Cherokee songs and burning sage. When I stopped by after my shift, she grabbed my arm with surprising strength. "The Shadow Walker is awake," she whispered. "He's angry, Joseph. The mountain bleeds and he smells it." I wanted to tell her she was imagining things, but standing there in the unusual cold, smelling, the sage smoke, and hearing her ancient songs, I felt something I'd never felt before on Blood Mountain. I felt watched. 3 days later, another hiker went missing. This time it was Dr. Sarah Chen, a professor from Emory University. She was researching Cherokee historical sites and had permission to camp overnight near the summit. Sarah was smart, careful. She knew the mountains well and always followed safety rules. When she didn't radio in Thursday evening, I hiked up before dawn Friday with my partner, Tom Wilson. Tom had been a ranger for 20 years. Big guy, ex-military, didn't believe in anything he couldn't shoot or arrest. He thought my Cherokee heritage was colorful, but not useful for real police work. "Probably just equipment failure," he said as we climbed in the pre-dawn darkness. "Radio batteries die, GPS units break, city people panic and do stupid things." But when we reached Sarah's campsite, we found something that made even Tom go quiet. Her tent was set up perfectly, guy lines tight, rainfly properly attached. Her sleeping bag was laid out neat and smooth. Her backpack hung from the bear cable exactly right. Camp stove clean and put away. Everything organized like she was coming right back. But Sarah was gone. No note, no signs of struggle, no indication she'd ever left the campsite after dark. Her hiking boots sat outside the tent, laces still tied. Her flashlight was inside, batteries full and working. "People don't just vanish," Tom muttered, checking the GPS coordinates twice. That's when I found the footprints. The same massive bare feet from Marcus Caldwell's death site. This time there were dozens of them, circling Sarah's tent like someone had paced around it all night. The prints were so deep they'd left permanent impressions in the hard-packed dirt. Tom measured them, 15 inches long, 6 inches wide. Human-shaped but wrong somehow. The toes too long, the arch too high. "Vagrant," Tom decided. "Some crazy mountain man living up here. Saw a woman camping alone and took her." But I was studying the tracks, artfully. They didn't lead anywhere. They just appeared at the edge of camp and disappeared into the rocks, like whoever made them could walk through stone. We called in search teams, dogs, helicopters. For 3 days, 40 people combed every inch of Blood Mountain. The dogs couldn't pick up Sarah's scent past her campsite. The helicopters saw nothing but endless forest. It was like she'd never existed. On the 3rd day of searching, I was checking a remote section of trail when my radio crackled to life. "Joe, you need to get back to base camp. Now." Tom's voice was tight, scared. I found him staring at a tree about 50 yards from Sarah's tent. At first, I didn't understand what had shaken him. Then I looked closer. Carved into the bark, 8 feet off the ground, were Cherokee symbols. Old ones, from before we had written language. The cuts were fresh, still bleeding sap, but they'd been made with something sharp and powerful. The tree was a massive oak, old-growth timber, with bark thick as armor. I recognized the symbols because my grandmother had taught them to me as a child. They said, trespasser, punishment, sacred ground, protected. What does it mean? Tom asked. I translated, and his face went pale. Joe, those cuts, they weren't made with any tool I know. Look at the depth, the precision. What could carve through oak bark like butter? I didn't answer because I was starting to have an idea, and it scared me more than I wanted to admit. That night, sleeping alone in my cabin, I dreamed of my grandmother's stories, the Shadow Walker, guardian of Cherokee sacred places, a being that could take any form, human, animal, or something in between. In the dreams, I saw a massive figure moving through the forest, leaving no tracks except when it chose to. I saw it watching hikers from the shadows, deciding who belonged on the mountain and who didn't. I woke up at 3 a.m. with the absolute certainty that something was standing outside my window. But when I looked, there was nothing there except darkness and the sound of wind in the trees. The next morning, we found Sarah's body on the summit, arranged in the same Cherokee prayer position as Marcus Caldwell. Same impossible cold, same giant footprints, same lack of injuries or explanation. But this time, there was something else. Clutched in Sarah's hand was a single eagle feather placed there after she died. In Cherokee tradition, eagle feathers are sacred, given only to warriors and spiritual leaders. It was a message, a signature. The Shadow Walker was real, and he was hunting. Word got out despite our efforts to keep things quiet. 2 unexplained deaths on Blood Mountain brought reporters, amateur investigators, and thrill seekers. The Park Service wanted to close the trail, but it was peak fall foliage season. Thousands of people had planned trips they couldn't cancel. We compromised on increased ranger presence and mandatory check-ins every 4 hours. Tom and I worked double shifts trying to keep hikers safe from something we couldn't identify or understand. That's when Dr. Mary Ridge arrived. Mary was a Cherokee anthropologist from the University of North Carolina, brought in to consult on the cultural aspects of the deaths. She was my age, sharp-eyed, and the first person who didn't look at me like I was crazy when I mentioned the Cherokee symbols. The Shadow Walker legend is specific to this mountain, she told me as we hiked to the summit together. According to oral history, he's been here for over 1,000 years. He's not evil exactly. He's a guardian. But guardians don't always distinguish between threats and innocent bystanders. You believe the stories? I asked. I believe that something is killing people in a way that perfectly matches traditional Cherokee accounts of Shadow Walker behavior, whether that's coincidence or causation. She shrugged. Let's see what we find. What we found was more evidence that reality was coming unraved. Lead on Blood Mountain. The temperature anomaly had spread. The entire upper third of the mountain was now 30 degrees colder than normal. Ice formed in the streams despite daytime temperatures in the 70s. Our breath steamed constantly above 3,800 feet elevation. Electronic equipment failed randomly. GPS units showed impossible coordinates, sometimes placing us hundreds of miles away, sometimes showing elevations below sea level. Digital cameras produced images full of shadows that moved between frames. Cell phones received calls from numbers that didn't exist, playing what sounded like Cherokee chanting. The animals had completely abandoned the upper mountain. No birds, no insects, no mammals. The forest was dead silent except for the wind. On our 3rd day of investigation, Mary and I were measuring the temperature variations when we heard it. Footsteps, heavy, deliberate footsteps circling our position. But when we looked around, we saw nothing but empty forest. The footsteps continued, crunch, crunch, crunch in the fallen leaves, invisible feet walking in a wide circle around us. "Don't move," Mary whispered. The footsteps stopped directly behind me. I could feel body heat, smell something wild and earthy, breath on the back of my neck. I turned around. Nothing there. "Did you see?" I started to ask. The tree next to Mary exploded. Not from any external force, it just burst apart from the inside, sending bark and splinters flying. In the moment of destruction, I caught a glimpse of something massive and dark moving away through the forest. Mary was bleeding from a dozen small cuts, but she was smiling. "It's real," she breathed. "It's actually real." That night, we camped at the base of the mountain and compared notes. Mary had been researching Cherokee oral histories for 15 years. According to the oldest stories, the Shadow Walker only became Aggies, restive when sacred sites were threatened by people who didn't understand their significance. "Think about the victims," she said. Marcus Caldwell was a descendant of soldiers who participated in Cherokee removal in 1838. Sarah Chen was researching Cherokee sites but wasn't Cherokee herself. Both of them were connected to historical trauma. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying the Shadow Walker might not be killing randomly. He might be settling old debts." The next morning, Elder Samuel Crow arrived at my grandmother's cabin. He was the keeper of traditional knowledge for our local Cherokee community, the man you went to when you needed to understand the old ways. He was 91 years old and had never set foot on Blood Mountain before. Said it was too sacred, too dangerous for ordinary people. But now he was here, carrying a leather bag of ceremonial items and wearing the traditional ribbons of a medicine man. "The mountain is crying," he told us in Cherokee, then switched to English. "The Shadow Walker has been sleeping, but white man's footsteps woke him up. Now he remembers all the old hurts, all the sacred ground that was stolen." "How do we stop him?" I asked. "Stop him?" Elder Crow looked surprised. "You don't stop a Shadow Walker, boy. You make peace with him. You show proper respect. You prove you understand what's sacred." But before we could ask what that meant, Tom Wilson's voice crackled over the radio. "Joe, we got another one. Solo hiker male found on the summit, but this one's different. This one's still alive." We raced up the mountain to find EMTs working on a man named David Wright, mid-40s, experienced hiker from Tennessee. He was conscious but in shock, babbling about the Shadow Man and eyes like fire. "It came right out of the trees," David gasped as they loaded him into the rescue basket. 9 feet tall, maybe more, covered in darkness that moved like it was alive. It looked at me with these red eyes, and I felt like it was reading my soul. "What happened then?" Mary asked. It spoke to me, in my head, not out loud. It said I didn't belong on sacred ground, that I should carry a message to others. Then it touched my forehead, and I saw things. Terrible things. Cherokee families being forced from their homes, children dying on the Trail of Tears, soldiers burning sacred sites. David Wright survived, but he was forever changed. He became an advocate for Cherokee rights, donating money to tribal causes and speaking publicly about the need to respect Native American sacred sites. The Shadow Walker had spared him, but not without purpose. That night, Elder Crow performed a cleansing ceremony at my grandmother's cabin. As he chanted and burned sacred herbs, he told us what we were really dealing with. "Shadow Walker is old magic," he said, "created by Cherokee shamans 1,000 years ago to protect our most sacred places. He's not alive like you or me. He's a spiritual force given form, powered by the collective will of our ancestors." "So he can't be killed?" Tom asked. "You can't kill something that was never born," Elder Crow replied. "But you can communicate with him. You can show respect. Sometimes, if you prove yourself worthy, you can even work together." The ceremony lasted until dawn. As the sun rose, Elder Crow packed his ceremonial items and prepared to leave. "The Shadow Walker will judge you, Joseph," he told me. "Your blood makes you Cherokee, but your choices will make you worthy or unworthy. Choose carefully." Then he was gone, leaving me with more questions than answers, and the growing certainty that Blood Mountain was about to test me in ways I couldn't imagine. The test came 2 days later. A group of college students from Georgia Tech arrived for a weekend camping trip. 8 kids, well-equipped and experienced, led by their outdoor club president, Kevin Martinez. They had permits, proper gear, and detailed trail plans. Everything legal and above board. What they also had was something none of us knew until it was too late. Kevin Martinez was researching his family genealogy for a school project. His great-great-grandfather had been Lieutenant Colonel James Martinez, one of the Army officers in charge of Cherokee removal from Georgia in 1838. The Shadow Walker knew. The students made camp at Slaughter Creek, about 2 miles below the summit. Tom and I were maintaining elevated patrols, checking on all hikers every few hours. When we reached their camp at 6 p.m. Friday, everything seemed normal. The kids were cooking dinner, laughing, planning their summit hike for Saturday morning. Kevin seemed like a good kid, responsible, respectful, genuinely interested in Cherokee culture. When he asked about local history, I found myself liking him despite my growing anxiety about what might happen. My ancestor was stationed in this area in the 1830s, he told me around the campfire. I'm trying to understand what role he played in Cherokee removal. Family stories make it sound like he was just following orders, but I want to know the truth. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the mountain's unnatural cold. Some truths are dangerous to uncover, I warned him, but he just laughed it off. Tom and I returned to our patrol cabin around midnight. The radio was quiet, the mountain peaceful. But I couldn't sleep. Something felt wrong, like the air itself was holding its breath. At 3 a.m., the screaming started. High, terrified screams echoing up from Slaughter Creek. Tom and I grabbed our gear and ran, crashing through the darkness with flashlights bouncing ahead of us. The screaming stopped before we made it halfway, leaving only the sound of our own breathing and the crunch of our boots on dead leaves. We found the camp destroyed. Not ransacked or torn apart, transformed. The tents were arranged in a perfect circle around a cold fire. The students' sleeping bags were laid out in the Cherokee prayer position, but they were empty. All 8 kids had vanished without a trace. Kevin Martinez stood in the center of the circle. He was alive, conscious, but changed. His eyes reflected our flashlight beams like an animal's. When he spoke, his voice carried harmonics that made my teeth ache. "The Shadow Walker wants to speak with you, Joseph Nighthorse," he said, but his lips barely moved. "Alone, on the summit, at dawn." "Kevin?" Tom stepped forward. "Son, what happened here? Where are the others?" Kevin turned his head with mechanical precision. "The others are safe. They are learning the true history of this place. But you, Thomas Wilson, are not welcome at this conversation. Your ancestors took Cherokee land. Your people broke every treaty they ever made. The Shadow Walker has nothing to say to you." Tom's hand moved to his sidearm, but I grabbed his wrist. "Don't," I whispered. "This isn't Kevin anymore." Kevin smiled, and for just a moment, I saw something else looking out through his eyes. Something ancient and patient and utterly alien to human experience. "Dawn, Joseph. Come alone, or the others will join their ancestors on the Nightland journey." Then Kevin collapsed, unconscious but breathing normally. When Tom checked his pulse, it was strong and steady. But when Kevin woke up 20 minutes later, he remembered nothing after going to sleep in his tent. The other 7 students were never found. I hiked to the summit alone as the sun rose, carrying traditional Cherokee ceremonial items my grandmother had given me years ago: eagle feathers, a medicine wheel, sage for burning, and a piece of Cherokee River stone blessed by 7 generations of medicine men. The Shadow Walker was waiting for me. I saw it first as a distortion in the air, like heat shimmer rising from summer pavement. Then it solidified into something that was almost human, but utterly wrong. 9 feet tall, with proportions that suggested immense strength. Its skin was the color of shadows, and the darkness moved across its surface like living smoke. Its eyes were red coals in a face that shifted between human and animal features. When it spoke, the words formed directly in my mind. "Joseph Nighthorse, son of 2 peoples. You carry Cherokee blood, but you think white man's thoughts. You protect this mountain, but you do not understand what you protect." I forced myself to stand straight, to meet those burning eyes. I understand that you're killing innocent people. Innocent? The Shadow Walker's laugh was like wind through dead trees. The first man carried the blood of soldiers who drove your people from sacred ground. The woman studied Cherokee secrets with no Cherokee permission. The children followed the bloodline of those who burned Cherokee towns. They didn't know. Ignorance is not innocence. Your people were forced from this mountain at gunpoint. Your sacred sites were desecrated, your ceremonies forbidden, your children taken to schools that beat Cherokee language from their mouths. But the white people who did these things, they raised children who raised children who raised children. The blood guilt passes down. I felt the truth of its words like a physical weight. My grandmother had told me stories of the removal, of families torn apart and sacred places destroyed. But I'd always thought of them as history, not as open wounds still bleeding. What do you want? I asked. I want the sacred places protected. I want Cherokee ceremonies performed on Cherokee ground. I want the spiritual balance restored that was broken by white man's greed. You can't bring back the past by killing people. I can prevent the future destruction of what little remains sacred. The Shadow Walker moved closer, and I felt the temperature drop another 20 degrees. Ice crystals formed in my breath. You have a choice, Joseph Nighthorse. Embrace your Cherokee blood. Learn the old ways. Help me protect what is sacred, or step aside and let me deal with trespassers as I see fit. And if I refuse both options? Then you join the white man's world complete. Tally, and I treat you as I treat all enemies of Cherokee's sacred ground. I looked into those red eyes and saw 1,000 years of patience, of waiting, of accumulated anger at injustices that could never be made right. But I also saw something else. A desperate loneliness. A spiritual being created to protect people who were mostly gone. Places that were mostly destroyed. There's another way, I said. The Shadow Walker's form flickered with surprise. I become a bridge, I continued, between Cherokee and white worlds. I use my ranger authority to protect sacred sites legally. I teach people to respect this place instead of just fearing it. I make sure Cherokee voices are heard when decisions get made about Cherokee land. And in return? You stop killing people. You give me time to make changes the right way. Legal ways. Ways that last. For a long moment, the only sound was wind through the rocks. Then the Shadow Walker spoke again. You would need to prove your commitment. Undergo the traditional tests. Learn ceremonies your grandmother never taught you. Accept spiritual responsibilities that will change your life forever. I accept. Then kneel, Joseph Nighthorse. Receive the mark of the Shadow Walker's protection. I knelt on the cold stone summit as the sun rose over Blood Mountain. The Shadow Walker placed one massive hand on my forehead, and pain shot through my skull like lightning. Images flashed through my mind. 1,000 years of Cherokee history, sacred ceremonies, spiritual knowledge that had been hidden from white authorities for generations. When it was over, I felt different, changed. Like I could see the spiritual dimension of the physical world, sense the sacred energy that flowed through certain places and avoided others. The 7 missing ones will be returned unharmed, the Shadow Walker said as its form began to fade. But remember, Joss, Eve Nighthorse, I am always watching. Disappoint me, and our alliance ends. Then it was gone, leaving only the normal sounds of mourning in the mountains. The 7 Georgia Tech students were found safe and unharmed at a trail shelter 15 miles away, with no memory of how they got there. Kevin Martinez finished his genealogy project by writing a detailed account of his ancestors' role in Cherokee removal and donating his scholarship fund to Cherokee educational programs. Tom Wilson took early retirement and moved to Florida. He never talked publicly about what he'd seen on Blood Mountain, but he became a substantial donor to Cherokee causes and historic preservation efforts. Dr. Mary Ridge and I co-authored a paper on traditional Cherokee site protection that became standard reading in anthropology programs. We also got married 2 years later, after she accepted a position with the Cherokee Nation's Cultural Resources Department. Elder Samuel Crow lived to be 98, passing on traditional knowledge to a new generation of Cherokee spiritual leaders. Before he died, he told me I'd done the right thing on Blood Mountain, but that the real work was just beginning. My grandmother passed away peacefully in her sleep at age 87, 2 years after the Shadow Walker encounter. Her last words to me were in Cherokee. "The mountain remembers everything. Make sure you remember too." I'm still a ranger on Blood Mountain, but my job has expanded far beyond what it used to be. I work with the Cherokee Nation to develop cultural education programs for park visitors. I perform traditional blessings at sacred sites and teach other rangers about Cherokee history and spiritual practices. Most importantly, I serve as a buffer between the human world and the spiritual forces that protect Cherokee sacred places. Because the Shadow Walker is still here, still watching, still protecting Blood Mountain from those who would desecrate or exploit it. I've seen it 3 more times over the years, always briefly, always when someone poses a genuine threat to the Mountain's spiritual integrity. A logging company executive who wanted to clear-cut old-growth forest. A developer who planned to build condos on Cherokee burial sites. A TV producer who wanted to film a ghost hunting show at sacred locations. All of them changed their minds after spending time on Blood Mountain. All of them became advocates for Cherokee rights and environmental protection. The Shadow Walker doesn't reveal itself to everyone. Most hikers pass through safely, enjoying the mountain's beauty without ever knowing about the ancient guardian that watches from the shadows. But for those who come with disrespect in their hearts or greed in their plans, Blood Mountain has ways of teaching proper reverence. I never believed Shadow Walkers were real until one saved my life by offering me a choice between worlds. Now I know that some legends exist not as fiction, but as spiritual truth that transcends ordinary reality. The Shadow Walker taught me that protecting sacred places means understanding what makes them sacred in the first place. Every morning when I patrol Blood Mountain, I perform a brief Cherokee blessing at the summit. I thank the ancestors for their protection, ask for wisdom in my duties, and acknowledge the spiritual presence that shares guardianship of this ancient sacred place. And sometimes when the morning mist clings to the mountainside and the air carries the scent of sage and cedar, I catch a glimpse of a massive figure moving through the trees, watching, waiting, protecting what remains of a sacred world that most people have forgotten ever existed. The Shadow Walker of Blood Mountain is real, and as long as there are sacred places that need protection, he always will be.